Well, I was born very young. I was born in a place called Garrison, Kentucky, in 1948, and I was a post-war World War II baby. My father was a medic in World War II, and he came home in 1945. So I was kind of a post-war baby. Uh, the area I lived in was impoverished. It was Appalachia, and so life was hard. Life was hard for everybody there. The families would tend to share some of the food that they had, some of the produce they would grow, and they got by. It was sort of a family neighbor relationship. Uh, when I guess my earliest memories of being alive, I guess I was about age 2, something like that. And we lived on a hillside, uh, and across the hillside was a little ravine, and this ravine had a bridge across it. And I can remember I was even in a diaper. I can remember that for some crazy reason, but I was in a diaper. And my father was over in the barn working. And I decide I'm going to go see my father. So I go across the bridge and I'm just playing my way across. And when I get to the other side, I see something down at the bottom of the ravine. And so I turn and I decide to go check that out. Well, when I got too close, I fell. I rolled all the way to the bottom of the ravine. I knocked over the beehives and I was stung all over my body. So I guess it was a traumatic thing, but I certainly remember it. And that was probably my earliest memory of my time. So I actually was born along a little river called the Kinnickinnick River. And at the time we were living in a log house basically. And at the time I was born, my father and the doctor decided to go fishing because the labor was going along. And I guess the midwife delivered the baby, and the fishing was kind of not so good. So anyway, that's kind of how the whole story was told to me. As far as my name, that came up just this past week. Uh, my dad wanted to name me after his father, who he had lost when he was 3 years old in a logging accident. So he wanted to name me after his father, William Ralph Bloomfield. And Mom said, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. And so I guess the argument ensued a while. My older sister, she was 5 years older than me. She was actually born just after my dad left for the war. And so she was spoiled by all the grandparents and things. And she kind of ruled the roost, so to speak. And she decides she's going to name me. And she had a little playmate up the road somewhere that was named Roger. And so that's how I got the name Roger. And somebody said, well, how come you don't have a middle name? Which I do not have a middle name. And I said, we were too poor, we couldn't afford one. So that's been my standard line on that one for years. Later on, and when the military insisted something go in that blank, they put in NMN, which stood for no middle name. So it was Roger and them Bloomfield. So that's kind of how we got there. But I can remember a little later on, my dad and I he wanted to take me into this little town called Vanceburg. And he had an old truck. And I remember I couldn't have been much more than 4 or 5 years old because I was standing up in the seat beside him. And we'd go into Vanceburg, we got the shirt, and it was a nice little corduroy type shirt, and beautiful shirt. And we're coming back, and a log truck backed across the road in front of us. And my father had to lock the truck up and bring it to a fast stop. Well, we didn't even have seat belts back in those days, so I fell straight into the dash and the windshield, and it really hurt my face and my nose and stuff. It was bleeding pretty badly. Ruined the shirt. And my father got out of the truck and pulled the driver out of the other truck and assaulted him rather hard. Let's put it that way. And when he came back, he always promised to buy me another shirt when he got me calmed down, but I don't remember ever getting the other shirt. But anyway, that was something about my father that I puzzled on for many, many years because of his reaction to the situation. And it wasn't even until recently that I kind of put together that his war experience, he was a medic, taking care of wounded soldiers. He had seen a great deal of blood. And that blood that he saw in me, he reacted to that, and it caused him to react to the person who caused it. So that's kind of a part of that story there. I don't know that I remember. Yeah, I guess it was one other time I remember my uncle Raymond, who was the oldest brother of my mother, and my father. We're pretty close. They both were in World War II. They were in Europe together quite a bit, and so they stayed friends after the war. And I'm probably, no, it had to be before 5 because we moved out of Kentucky later on. But they decided we're going to go fishing, and they take a john boat, and they put me in a john boat in between the two seats, and there's a little lantern in the john boat, and there's one of them on one seat and one on the other. And we're out in the water fishing, and I'm just sitting there looking around at the strange shadows of the trees and the flashing of the lights and the water sparkling around the side of me, and I'm scared to death. And my uncle tells my dad, he says, well, he says, we're not catching any fish. Says, you mind if I hold him over the side by his feet and use him for bait? And of course, that was terrifying to a kid 5 years old. So they thought it was funny as all get out, but it wasn't too funny to me. So that was another of the, I guess, the younger years kind of memories. I guess my life has been filled with trauma, and that's some of it, I guess, as I've kind of gone off through life, realizing and looking back that a lot of things seem to be like trauma, to me, that I remember most. I don't remember a lot of really wonderful times at that age, so it wasn't until we moved, I guess, to Mansfield at age 5 that I got old enough to kind of, I guess, begin to remember some things. The only really nice times I can remember was Christmas. And that seemed to be a time of the year when my mother and my father, who tended to argue a great deal, they seemed to get along, and we'd have a beautiful Christmas tree, and didn't have much money, so we usually just got one gift, sometimes 2 gifts, but it was that's the way Christmas went, and we always appreciated everything we had. It was just a lot of fun, and there'd always be candy and just a good time had with the family. So Christmas was always a happier time in the family. I remember we had rented a home, and there's only 4 rooms in the home, and we were in an area that was called Little Kentucky, and it was named that because the steel mills, the brass companies, all of the industrial companies there had basically recruited people out of Appalachia to come and work and bring their families and stay in the area for laborers. And so this community grew up because there was a group of people mostly out of Kentucky. And so it got the nickname Little Kentucky. For the most part, it was pretty run down. It was shanties, outhouses, just a host of not the greatest living conditions in the world for anybody. But we lived in a 4-room house, and I do believe it did have an outhouse. It did, as I recall. I guess the fondest memory I had of it, we were eating dinner one evening, and my little brother was a really an ornery little guy, and so he'd be 4 years younger than me, but he was always my father's favorite, and so my dad had told him to come in and eat dinner, and he said no. So he's outside playing, and my father yelled at him again, and he says, I told you to come in and eat dinner. And again, he got a no. And my father said, if I have to come up to get you now, I'm going to spank you. And he said, no, you're not. So here comes my father after him. And so my little brother, he takes off just flying around the house. Say, if I was 5, he would have been 3, I guess, something like that. Give or take a little bit. But he goes around the house as fast as his little feet can go. So my dad runs out and he just stands on the porch and he walks over to the corner of the house and he just waits on him. And he comes around the house really fast and runs right into my dad's arms. And needless to say, he didn't want to do that again that day. So he did get spanked, but it was always just so cute. It's a cute story. But my dad was a very intelligent man. He only had an 8th grade education. My mother had a 6th grade education. But I'll have to say, even though I'm a well-educated man and I've known a lot of well-educated people, I've never known anyone smarter than my father, or more brilliant than my father, more capable than my father. He was just a remarkable man. And so he decides he's going to build us another house, and he bought the lot next door to the house we lived in. And he did. He built the entire house from scratch. And even though I'm a little guy and I'm young, we get kind of incorporated in this too as time went by. And there'd be things that he'd have us do, either carrying this, carrying that, or whatever. But it became kind of a family operation to build it. But the house was built, and we did have to dig our own septic tank system and that sort of thing. It was the first actually indoor plumbing we'd had. Probably my mother had seen for maybe forever. I don't know, because they really didn't have much of that in Kentucky at all. So anyway, we were digging the septic systems, and I remember the times that we shoveled the dirt, and very small, but we're out there with shovels, just having a great time, playing in the dirt, making holes, and but then I get the task of filling in the line that went to the gas line back to the road. And the deal was that I told my dad, I says, are we going to go to Kentucky and visit our cousins? And he says, we have to fill in the ditch, so we can't go. And he had to go to work, and I says, well, what if I filled it in? Well, I wasn't very big, and he's figured it ain't going to happen, so he says, well, if you fill in the ditch, we'll go to Kentucky. And so I go to work and shoveling that thing, and to my amazement and his too, I shoveled probably about 100 foot of dirt out to the road, filled it in, had it heaped up when he come in, and sure enough, he took us to visit our cousins. But that's some of the earliest memories, I guess, of growing there up in the area there. The community that was it was just a group of people who were Appalachian, very poor, beginning to finally make lives for themselves with local employment. And so they were kind of digging their way out. And from their perspective, it had to be really remarkable. I was too young to fully understand and appreciate really how much that really was and how much happened in that time frame. Education-wise, I started school there in Mansfield, and I attended, I think, the 5th grade elementary to begin school, and moved on then to a school called Empire, which was named after the local steel company, which was Empire Steel. And I was there in grades 4, 5, and 6. And somewhere in grade 5, they did aptitude testing. And for whatever reason, I tested very well. And they came in at roughly halfway through the school year. And the principal walked up and asked me to spell evergreen. And I just looked at it, that's kind of crazy, evergreen, come on. And so I spelled evergreen, and they said, okay, come with me. And next thing I know, I'm in 6th grade. And so it was tough to catch on to the division because we were doing math, and we just finished multiplication and starting division. So I get into sixth grade and we're in long division, so I didn't get any recesses. I worked all long division. But I managed to finish sixth grade, go on to seventh grade, and so basically took 2 grades in the same year. Uh, that was good and bad, I guess. I was a smart kid. I was doing well academically, but I was much smaller than the other kids in my class. Therefore, became the kid that's going to get bullied, and so the bullying started right about sixth grade, and it never stopped. I was always smaller than the other people until I was a senior in high school, and then of course then there was payday for those that I remembered. But basically, it was a mixed blessing, I guess. I graduated from high school at age 16 and couldn't get a job. You had to work, you actually had to be 18 to get a job at that time. Even with parent permission, it was very difficult to get a job. So when I did graduate from high school, the first summer that I had was a farm job baling hay. We put in 13,000 bales of hay. When I say we, the person driving the tractor and me, and we put in 13,000 bales of hay that summer, working $1 an hour. And I handled all 13,000 of those bales 3 times. So that was an education in and of itself, to get an education. Which is, I guess it reminds me of another story. My father was, for whatever reason, he'd built a barn, and we were raising cattle, and the farm was growing over time. And I was probably early high school, something like that. And he come out one day and he says, I want to put water in the barn. And he says, so I want you to dig a ditch from here at the house all the way to the barn over there, which was a couple hundred yards. It was a long ways. And he said, I want it to slope 1 inch per foot all the way to the barn. And so I started digging this ditch. And each evening he'd come home from work. He would come out there and he would inspect it, and he would measure it and see if it dropped 1 inch per foot. And so, trying to do a good job for my dad and please him, I really worked hard to make sure that it really did drop the 1 inch per foot. And so I was about halfway out when my dad asked me at some point, he says, I said, what is the point in this? And he said, well, the point is, son, unless you want to be digging ditches the rest of your life, you need to get a good education. And I said, okay. And he says, now finish the ditch. So I did finish the ditch. And he comes out after we finished the ditch, and he measures the whole thing to make sure it was exactly as he requested it. He come back and he says, okay. He says, now fill it in. And I said, what about the water? And he says, I wasn't going to put water in, just fill it in. So I did. I filled in the entire ditch. Well, it was later in life, after I was married and had kids, and I'd come home to actually help my father put in some hay. And he says, we actually had some cattle together. And he said, we really need to get some water in the barn. And I just laughed at him and I said, it's not going to happen. You want water in the barn, this time you do it. But that was a memory I had of him. But it did reinforce the fact that a good education wasn't a bad thing. And so that kept me at least academically going along. The high school I was in was Plymouth High School. It was about 15 miles or so from the Mansfield area of Little Kentucky, where we had spent some time. And we didn't fit in, none of the kids that were born and raised there sort of had their own cliques, their own communities, and anyone outside that was never accepted. And so I was started there when I was in 7th grade, which unfortunately followed the 6th grade episode, so I'm still a small guy. And so things just don't go well. And I hated school. I hated middle school. I hated high school. Uh, the high school was one that really did not appreciate, at least the environment did not appreciate learning or people that had a good education. If you got good grades, you were kind of looked down upon. And so, as they used to make the expression, I had to dumb down for high school there to keep from getting beat up all the time. So that's what I did. So I was probably about a C student and did really well. But my junior year, there was a huge football player. He was probably 6'5" and a couple 100 pounds, and he was always known as the big guy on campus kind of thing. And but he's also a very big bully. And because I had worked on the farm so long, milking cows, baling hay, doing all that very physical work, my forearms and my hands were extremely strong. And so one day he decides he's going to grab me, and I grab his hands between my fingers, and I snap his wrists back, and I put him on his knees in front of an entire classroom of people. And I kept him on his knees, and I let him cry a while. I let him beg a while, and then threaten him if he ever bothered me again, kind of thing. You know, this is what's going to happen. Well, I guess the end result of that was nobody ever messed with me again after that. So that was the end of the bullying, and I kind of had a pretty good senior year. We graduated from high school in 1965, June of 1965. The sad thing about it was that it became the graduation day, and my family didn't want to go to the graduation. None of them wanted to go. And I felt really bad about it. And I'm asking them to go, and my father refused to go. He didn't want to attend any kind of public performances, which later on I understood was a part of his post-traumatic stress from World War II. But basically, there was no one wanted to go to the graduation. And so eventually I persuaded my mother to go very reluctantly, but she resented the fact that she went. And but that was the only person I had at my high school graduation. And it was heartbreaking. You know, I'm 16 years old. That's quite an accomplishment to have finished high school by the age of 16. And but it stuck. It stayed with me. So later in life, when I went on to get both a bachelor's degree and then later a master's degree, no one ever knew. I never asked anyone. I never told anyone. I never attended any of the ceremonies. And looking back, I kind of wish I had. I guess I gave up a lot of things that really was something that would have been a good outcome for me to do. But because of that early hurt, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But that kind of is the way things went. But anyway, after high school, then we were in the era of Vietnam at that time. And so by the time you were 19 and just about all of that part of Ohio, if you hadn't gone to college after high school, you were going to be in the military. And one way or another, you could either join or be drafted, but you're going to be in the military. There wasn't anything to do in that area, so after high school, people would hang out. We would usually drink beer and just kick around. There wasn't a lot to do. There weren't any activities of any sorts. So mostly we just got in trouble that way. But there was a time when we knew the draft was going to catch up with us. But the good thing was I'd finally gotten a decent job or two. And by the time I was by the time I was 18, I was working with Standard Oil in the agricultural end of their works. and became the former and acting manager of a local farm fertilizing type of company. And so I was doing well. It wasn't making a great deal of money, but I was at least successful in the regard of being able to advance myself. But it wasn't long into that when about April of 1968, when the draft notices came in to be drafted into the military. The Vietnam War was at its height, so they were really looking for just about all of us in that age bracket. And so I guess the next scenario was I can recall standing in a line in Columbus, Ohio, most of us from a couple of counties around there, and because we all kind of would bump into each other, fight with each other, whatever, from town to town, we knew each other. And we're standing at the induction center in Columbus, Ohio. There is 144 guys standing there, of which I am still the smallest guy. And out of 144 guys, this big giant sergeant comes out, very smartly dressed in his Marine Corps uniform, and I'm going, oh no. And it was oh no, because out of 144 people, he picked 5. And I happened to be one of them. I really didn't want to go to the Marine Corps, but it wasn't something that I could refuse to do, because that was a part of my whole family heritage. My family had been a part of virtually every war back to the Civil War in one way or another, so it was just a part of the ingrained heritage that we served our country. We did what we needed to do. I didn't do it very willingly when I was asked to step out and you're going to be a Marine, but I was a little upset about that whole thing, which I found out you didn't do much of that either in the Marine Corps. So we were basically assigned into the Marine Corps, loaded onto a jet, and flown to California, because Paris Island had closed down because of a training accident where they marched a platoon into the swamp, and several of them were killed. So they closed the whole thing down, and the rest of us were sent to California, where we were called Hollywood Marines. Kind of a nickname that came along with being in the Marine Corps out there. Marine Corps life was very hard. Boot camp was it was a prisoner of war in those days. It was brutal. It was intense. From the moment we hit the ground in California, which unfortunately we flew out with Bob Hope in first class, and he was buying all the drinks. And so we, unfortunately, when we landed, were a little bit inebriated, and met this even bigger sergeant with the bus that's taking us to boot camp. And so it's still kind of funny. We're still having a little fun out of it. And when we get to the recruitment area where we're going to be signed in, we step out and there's a big yellow footprints. And they said, follow those. And you didn't follow them, you got beat down. So you stood in the steps, you followed the steps, and they followed a progression. The first one was to get all of your hair cut off, which I had a very beautiful head of hair that I really enjoyed and hated to have cut off. And they just buzzed it all off, and you watch it fall off to the side, and you're thinking, this is even worse than I imagined it could be. And unfortunately, it was even worse than that. We still went on through a series of shots. We went on through dental exams in which if they found you needed any kind of dental assistance, they went ahead and injected your gums then in line. And whenever you got to the dentist, they took care of you, which unfortunately, when I got to the dentist, the Novocaine had worn off, and it wasn't a very pleasant experience. but none of the Marine Corps was pleasant at all. But boot camp was quite brutal. It was my determination that I was not going to let them break me. I was not going to let them break my will or turn me into this killing machine that had no emotions. And for the most part, I have to say, they managed to turn me into what they wanted me to be. But I still had at least a few emotions left. But looking back, I'm proud of being a Marine. It's something that few people could accomplish very well, and so I guess that's at that point where we're at. Marine Corps boot camp is just an experience that I wouldn't recommend for anybody. It was particularly in that era. I think it's changed some because of regulations now. They're probably somewhat more gentle, but not a lot, I wouldn't think. They have a reputation for being the baddest of the bad, and they intend to keep it. And so that's what they were doing. They were taking us from these redneck guys that, were 18 years old, I guess. I guess I was 19 years old. Most of us were 19 years old at that time. And they're trying to turn us into fighting machines that are capable of fighting from the moment they hit ground in Vietnam. We have 13 weeks to prepare. The whole period of boot camp was 10 weeks. And it was brutal, absolutely brutal. The first 3 days in boot camp, we marched endlessly 24 hours a day for 3 consecutive days and nights. And we were exhausted, completely exhausted. And I recall that when we finally got to see the barracks, I was so tired, I just crawled up on a bunk and was going to go to sleep. And this drill sergeant comes in and says, "I didn't tell anyone to go to bed." And he rolls me out of the bunk, and I hit the cement floor in the barracks and nearly broke my back. But there wasn't a lot you could say. You weren't allowed to respond to even pain. And so back to attention. Stood at attention. In fact, we had to stand at attention every day on our foot lockers, and we would be inspected 2 or 3 times a day. And after that 3 days of marching and exhaustion, they did let us sleep till about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they rolled us out again. And we began drill practice, we began physical training. Everything was done all day long. There wasn't any real breaks other than the time we ate. We became very proficient with rifles, mostly carry them around, but they also were preparing us for, when we graduated, each of the platoons had to march before a general that was set up at the center of the parade center, and at that point we all had to be able to make these motions with these rifles, including spinning them, pitching them into the air and catching them, much like you see the Marine Corps do in some of the photographs. We all had to be able to do that. Well, unfortunately, you get all these people in platoons who have many very different academic capacities and learning aptitudes. And so every time someone couldn't do it, then everyone was punished for it. And some of the punishment, we stood in the sun. I know one day, at least 5 hours, holding full foot lockers over our head. Part of it was to make us stronger. Most of it was just to teach us that they had control. The we would be what they wanted us to be. So that was just kind of how boot camp went from beginning to end. It was they switched off sergeants about every 3 days. Each sergeant stayed with us 24 hours a day for that 3-day period, and very little difference in their personalities. They were all very driven to do, basically just to make us be what we were going to be. And overall, at the time I smoked, there was a lot of us that did smoke. We went probably 2 weeks before we got the first cigarette, and that was about 4 puffs off a cigarette before we were ordered to put them out, and then away we went again into marching forever and ever and ever. It was endless marching, endless running. We learned to do hand-to-hand combat, which I guess the interesting story that went along with that was there was a guy in my platoon who was a very big guy, very strong, and we were doing what they called pugil stick fighting. And the pugil sticks were just simply these long poles that had a little bit of padding on the ends of them, sort of like a boxer's glove with a little bit of padding in them. And we were all lined up on this field, and then we were told to charge each other and battle it out with these pugil sticks. And so, for whatever reason, I was called a flower child. I guess it was the long hair. A lot of us got nicknamed because we were draftees, and the draftees were punished and trained much harder than the rest of them were. Nobody got off easy, but we got off pretty rough. And so we're out doing the pugil stick training. And at the time they lined up, I realized, no, it couldn't be. But I drew the big guy, the biggest guy in the whole platoon. And so he's standing over there just looking at me, just growling. And I'm standing back there with my pugil stick thinking, this is going to be interesting. And so we were supposed to wait until the sergeants told us to go. And so my sergeant turns me around and starts giving me these instructions on how he wanted me to do this. And then he turns me around and says, go. Well, at that point, unfortunately, the other sergeant had let the big guy go, and he's at a dead run with a pugil stick, and he laid me flat out right there on the ground, about as hard as I've ever been hit. And so that's kind of how the whole thing went in boot camp. It was very, very punishing. It didn't make us much stronger. It made us resilient. I guess to some extent, I'd have to say probably it made us driven enough to do what we had to do when we got in combat. But also when I was severely wounded, I think the training probably helped me endure a great deal of pain, a great deal of suffering in order to survive. So I still wasn't real happy about boot camp, but hey, I got through it, you know. And we did all get through it. The final day of graduation, my family had all driven out, and, which was pretty neat. They didn't do it for anything else, but they did do it for that, which was really nice. And so we do our parade marching before all that. And I don't know how many there were. There were probably 500 or 600 of us that were going to graduate that day. And it was a remarkable thing to see these rather sharp Marines out there marching in step, doing the rifle motions that we had to do and be able to really make it look good. And we did. But we did graduate. We had, I think, 4 hours with our families, and that was it. We're back in the Marine Corps all over again. And so we load in trucks from there, and we're driven to Camp Pendleton base, which was north of San Diego. And it's basically a base. It's in a desert, and that's where we're going to learn our infantry training. The infantry training was a little less stressful in the fact that we had slightly more freedom in our barracks. Uh, we weren't inspected quite as strictly as we were in boot camp. In boot camp, they literally had, when they said you had to have a sheet that you could bounce a quarter off of, they absolutely meant it. And that's how they checked your bed. Now, some of us got smart enough that once we got the right inspection, we didn't unmake the bed. We would slide under the covers, and when we got out, we slid out of the covers and we smoothed them back down. So we got around a little bit of the punishment just like that. But so when we got to infantry training, it was quite a relief to know that we did at least have to bounce a quarter. It still had to be Marine Corps proud, but we didn't have to do that. One of the other things that happened in boot camp that I guess I kind of overlooked, we had to do a floating training because the Marine Corps is a branch of the Navy, actually. And primarily they're intended to be a shipboard type of fighting unit. Recent wars where we fought on land, including Vietnam, was not the Marine Corps that they trained for. They trained for Marines that could basically hit the beaches on islands like they did in World War II. So one of the things you had to be able to do was jump off the ship and be able to float for 1 hour with full gear on. Shoes, boots, clothing, backpack, helmet, all of it. And you had to be able to float for 1 full hour. Well, I was not a great swimmer. I could barely even dog paddle. And so I really was not looking forward to that activity at all. And wasn't sure that I could do it, but the ones that couldn't do it wasn't very good, so the outcome. So I decided I'm going to try it anyway. And so I was able to make it about 15 minutes. The activity was one in which you would basically float with your face down as long as you could hold your breath. And then you would twist your head just long enough to exhale and inhale and go back into the water. And you had to do this for an hour. And needless to say, I couldn't do it. So I made it back to the edge of the pool, and the sergeant standing there stands on my hands and tells me I'm getting back out in the water. So he takes his boot and he pushes my face back out into the water. So I go back out into the pool, and I'm struggling to really even stay afloat and breathe at that point. And just realize that I can't make it. I know I'm not going to make it. And the next thing I know, I am literally on the bottom of the pool. I can feel the concrete on the side of my face, and I can see up out of the corner of my eye that they let me essentially drown. And I'm still alert enough that I can tell that I can't get back up. Well, finally someone does dive down. They do pull me out of the water. They do pump me out and beat me half to death. And but they do bring me back to recovery. And once they got it done, they stand me up and said, "You failed. So you will make it up when you get to infantry training." So that brings us back to Camp Pendleton. So when we get to Camp Pendleton, one of the first things we have to do, for those of us who couldn't do that particular activity, was we had a 50-foot high tower that stood over a 20-foot pool. And it was our responsibility then to climb up on that 50-foot tower, which simulated a ship, and jump off and swim out of that 20-foot pool. At that point, I began to use a little ingenuity, realizing I couldn't get out of doing it. So I decided, all right, well, I'm gonna make the best of this. I'm going to, when I hit the bottom, which I knew I would at that height. I'm going to push myself forward, hold my breath, and try to make it as far toward the shallow end as I possibly can before I have to surface. And I jumped off the tower and was able to make it at least into shallow enough water that I could dog paddle to the end and passed. And I don't know what I would do in the ocean at that point, but it didn't. I don't know what you would do with the rest of it either, to be honest. Some of the training didn't make a lot of sense, but they were trying to make you strong, tough, and just basically someone who could endure. But if you were on a ship, you should be able to float. That was their objective, I guess. I did learn to float later in life, but not there. The infantry training, we didn't really have a lot of free time. The only thing that advantage we had at Camp Pendleton was after we were there a couple of weeks, they did start giving us weekend passes, which was pretty cool. It was the first freedom we'd actually had since we'd started. And problem was, you were 18, 19 years old. Drinking age out there was 21. Your head shaved. Even in civilian clothes, the whole world knows who you are. So Marines were not that welcome in town anywhere around there. So the best you could do was pretty much go rent a motel, or we couldn't go to Disneyland. So most of the time we ended up going to Disneyland, walking around, trying to pick up girls that we had nothing we could do with anyway. So it was kind of a futile thing, but we were out for at least a weekend. You had to be back at exactly the right time, or you were put in a brig. Some guys didn't make it. Some guys spent some pretty rough time in a brig, in pretty bad shape. The Marine Corps was not a very pleasant place to make enemies. The final day of infantry training, well, I guess I'll back up just a little bit. We had to basically qualify with pistols and with rifles. And they had a procedure they called snapping in. And with the snapping in, you took a rifle, which they were using the old World War II M2 rifles or M1 rifles. And we would be out there all day long in the hot heat. And we had to be able to bend our arm a certain way to be able to get into a sniper position. And they would stand on our arm sometimes. Some of them broke. Some guys got brutalized even worse. But it was to train you how to get into a position and be able to shoot from that position and qualify accurately. That went on for about a week, and we finally got to go for our qualification. Oddly enough, when we got to the qualification part of it, they loosened up some of the severity of the drill instructors. They were more pleasant, slightly. They smiled. Not much, but they smiled a little. And but we did qualify. We had 2 days of qualification. The first day I fired a perfect qualification. I was an excellent shot. And when we came in for dinner that night, the sergeant took me aside and he says, "If you shoot that good tomorrow in Bloomfield, I'll put you in sniper school." I had time to think about that overnight, and I thought, well, I don't want to be a sniper. I may have to hurt people, but I don't have to know I did it. So I went out and I fired down about 3 shots outside of the bullseye, which made him quite mad because he knew I did it on purpose. But that was my qualification. I got chewed out pretty roughly, but I still ended up not having to be a sniper. But anyway, I guess in some regards, it might have been a better life. I might have come out of it better than I did. But the last act that we did in infantry training was that we had to run the gauntlet, they called it. It was a brutal procedure where we had packs that were loaded with rocks. The rocks were probably at least 20, 30 pounds. We were in full gear, rifles, helmets, everything. We were completely field dressed. And we ran for over 20 miles before we stopped. And if you dropped, they walked over you, dragged you, whatever they had to do until you got back up and made it. But we did have to finish an entire 20-mile run through some very, very difficult terrain. We were shot at, different activities they did just to train us under very adverse conditions. At the end of that, then, we finally were called a Marine. But up to that point, we were not Marines yet, which was kind of funny. I thought that was kind of an odd way to do things. But from there, we were held in barracks until we were basically ready to be assigned on our flights to Vietnam. All of us were told from the beginning that we would be going to Vietnam and we would be going as combat Marines. We would not be given any other option other than some variation of a combat Marine. Sniper, of course, was one variation. The 4 or 5 of us that had been drafted in Mansfield, or in Columbus actually, we were in the same platoon in boot camp, except for the one. We basically had, out of five people, one did not make it through boot camp. He was basically medically discharged. He just couldn't endure it. Of the 4 of us that did make it through boot camp, one was killed soon after he got to Vietnam. 2 of us were very, very seriously wounded and ended up 100% disabled by the time we returned from Vietnam. And only 1 out of that entire group came back without any injuries. And the only reason that really occurred was because after about a month, he did get a chance to become an armorer in a rear position in Da Nang, and did not have to be in the field. And so he made it. He made it all the way through. But basically, it was just an interesting process that the Marine Corps used. They flew you out. We actually flew over on commercial jets, United Airlines, stewardesses, the whole thing. Problem was, we were in military combat uniforms with loaded rifles on board these planes, which was interesting too, which was to make you understand that you're leaving one world, you're going to another, and in that world, it's going to be different, much, much different from what you're in now. Interesting enough, the 2 stewardesses that were on the flight, they took the time to stop with some of us and talk and get to know us and take pictures with us. And at that point, you knew you weren't going to see any pretty women for a very, very long time. So it was kind of nice to have that time together with them. And we had a lot of fun. The reason I tell that particular story is because it circles back later to these same 2 ladies at a later point in my way back home. But when we got to Vietnam, we landed in Da Nang and we deboarded the plane. That's when life became real. They marched us into a hangar, and in the hangar were about 75 to 100 body bags that were laying on the floor. They marched us through the center of them and pointed out that these were Marines going home, and that the average lifespan of a Marine in a firefight in Vietnam was 7.5 seconds. So it was to, I guess, drive home the point that this is real. This is the real deal, and this is what you were trained for. This is what's going to be your life for the next 13 months if you can survive it. And from there, they took us to units where we would eventually be separated into the units that we were going to serve with. I was basically sent to what was called the 126 unit. It was the 1st Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment. It was one of the more elite units that served in Vietnam. They had been decimated as far as infantrymen. They needed bodies, and we became those new bodies. We were kind of dropped into those positions, and were expected to be able to basically perform from the time we hit the ground. And that's what we did. You learned quickly. You adapted as fast as you could. There really weren't any friendships to make because no one really got close for a lot of reasons. You lost people pretty quickly in firefights, and so you didn't really get to know a lot of guys very well. I joined the Charlie Company, as it was called, of 1st Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment. And they were a very battle-hardened group. They had been in Quezon, they had been in Way City, they had been on Hill 861. They had many, many casualties. And so we were basically some of the replacement troops to try to build that unit back up. We were stationed, we had a base camp, I suppose we were probably 30 miles north of Da Nang. And our whole day and night behavior or performance, I guess our missions, so to speak, were to run ambush patrols at night. And we would do search and destroy missions during the day. And part of those search and destroy were called sweeping motions, where we would try to sweep up whatever other activity or enemy that we may have missed during the night. So I was there before Thanksgiving. I know, I think I was probably in country sometime early September. And it was pretty intense. What few men that were left from the 126 that had come out of the hard battles to the north were very hardened men. They stayed to themselves. They didn't talk a lot. Very hard to break down that barrier between them and make some kind of a personal connection. We were the new guys, and they didn't want new guys getting them killed. And so they treated it as such. So you pretty much had to learn as you went. Well, I was basically what they called an 0351 Marine, which made me an infantry Marine, but yet I was also a weapons specialist. Essentially, just had to carry more stuff and shoot it if you had to, kind of thing. But I did carry one of the weapons was called a LAW, light anti-personnel weapon. And it was basically a rocket launcher that extended, you pulled it out and fired it. And you had to be sophisticated enough to do your own range finding. They didn't have the capabilities you do today with lasers. So you had to be able to determine the distance you had to fire, the target you had to hit, and fire these weapons. Usually under situations where they're firing back. And so you would have to get up and fire this thing in enemy fire. We were basically operating between three were known Viet Cong villages. By day, they were just Vietnamese families getting by, living the lives they lived. raising rice paddies, raising rice in rice paddies. But we didn't get to know any of the Vietnamese, but you could at least empathize with where they were. The Marine Corps didn't at least kill that part of me, because I realized early on, this is their country. For as far as they're concerned, I'm the invader here, and I needed to at least respect that amount of that. This is their country, and some of them of the Viet Cong were very young, very, very young, and they were trained at a very young age to kill. And so the way it would generally operate in our particular area of operation was that we would go out at dark, roughly about sunset. We would start out, and we would go through one of the VC villages and out into whatever positions we were going to set up for ambushes. And we would wait for them to either be going out to resupply a Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army unit somewhere out in the jungle or out in the areas that we were doing missions in. One of the early missions we went out on, because I was a weapons specialist, we had 4-man firing teams in all of our platoon. And so we had 4 men who were a part of the weapons specialist team. The weapons guys were never supposed to be the last guys on the end, which was called Tail End Charlie. We weren't supposed to walk point, which was the first guys that went out and led the rest of the troops through whatever. The 2 areas where generally the first casualties occur were the ones who were walking point and the ones who were on Tail End Charlie. Well, one of the very early missions I went out on, we go out through the Viet Cong village, and we were out about 75 yards from this village when there is some contact out in front of us. And so we get down on the ground, and we're waiting for some kind of direction from this officer who is a part of our platoon to tell us what we're going to do, whether we're going to move forward, whether we're going to hold this position, what's going to happen with this particular engagement. As I'm laying there in the dirt, I look back, and there's just enough moonlight and ambient light behind me that I could see 3 Viet Cong coming out of the village. They were carrying rice bags that were pretty good sized rice bags. And so I keep watching over my shoulder at these Viet Cong, and they're walking right straight at me. And there was no way to communicate with the Marines pretty much beside me without giving my position away. And so I was going to have to wait and see what was going to happen. I kept waiting on the order to come to do something so I could at least turn around and fire on them or move out ahead, whatever we're going to do. And the order doesn't come. The reason that there wasn't anybody on the tail end, I guess, to make the story even more realistic as it was, the team that was behind me, the 4-man team that was behind us, the lieutenant had ordered them to come out and around and go out front as a listening post and to try to alert us as to what kind of enemy force we had out in front of us. I'm laying in the dirt, and this team is coming along, and we have 4 men laying out in front of us, and then we're all laying on line in positions to fire. And I'm trying to keep an eye on the Viet Cong that are coming out of the village to see if they're going to walk over top of us or what's going to happen. And so as we're laying there, I realize they're coming straight at me. So something's going to have to happen. So I'm flipping dirt at one of my men next to me. I'm trying to get his attention. And finally, I was able to get enough dirt in his helmet that he finally turned to see what I was doing. And I pointed out that we had these Viet Cong coming at us. Uh, they literally walked within an arm reach of me, and we laid flat down in the dirt so that we hopefully weren't going to be discovered and give both our position and the whole platoon's position away. Uh, they were talking in Vietnamese with each other and just a normal conversational speech. They never noticed me laying there, and they walked right on by. But we basically, the two of us that had picked up on these three Vietnamese, we watched them try to target them at such time that were given a fire order. They walked till they went out of basically light distance. They were out in front of us, but the order did finally come to open up and fire. Two of us turned to fire at those three. The rest of the platoon fired straight ahead, and unfortunately shot some of the men that in the four-man team that had been sent out in front. For whatever reason, basically there was a lot of incompetence in the leadership that we had in Vietnam. And that was one instance where some men got hurt because the lieutenant had forgotten he had sent a fire team out in front of a squad, and those men were shot. Basically, we had to do an after-action sweep of this area once the battle was over, firefight was over. And so we called in what was called illumination. The illumination was fired over us by mortar platoons that were many, many miles away. And these phosphorus, it's kind of interesting to watch these things, but these phosphorus shells would go off, and they would emit this uncanny yellowish, greenish glow that really lit up the area that you were in. It was kind of a surreal moment. And so as we got the phosphorus lighting in, we basically got up to make our sweep then to see what we had done, what kind of contact we'd had, to try to both have the medics treat our four men that were out in front, and then to sweep and see how many enemy that were killed. At that time, we were required to drag any dead that we had in our firefights back to a rear position where they would be counted. It seemed like such an inhumane thing to have to do, but it was just one of the Marine Corps requirements of that particular area that we were operating in. The two of us that fired at the three, when we got up to make the sweep, we decided to go in that direction and see how badly they were hit. To our astonishment, they weren't there. We knew they couldn't have basically escaped if we were too close. We would have had to have hit them, and yet we couldn't find a trace of them. So that was a puzzling thing. There were so many of these puzzling events would happen that you couldn't quite understand or put your finger on. It was it's just part of war. I guess the smoke of war, whatever you want, fog of war, sort of the fog of war. We didn't find those three bodies, but when we did sweep back across, we did find that we had hit 6 or 7 enemy, and we had 2 wounded bad enough of our people that we were going to have to bring them back on poncho liners and carry them back. So we basically were dragging the dead enemy, one of us on each foot. The injured Marines were put on ponchos and carried back to be treated in the rear because the choppers didn't want to land in that particular active firing area where chance was they would be shot up by the enemy. We did bring the bodies back. You can never forget the faces. You can never forget the feel of the skin of a dead enemy. You couldn't forget the blood that you had on your hands that belonged to another human being. War was a hellish thing. It's something that I will never ever understand. Humanity cannot find a way to avoid such atrocities with each other, regardless of what your differences are. But we did drag the enemy back. We dragged them back to an army compound where we basically would lay them out, and they would be counted, and generally they were put on a truck and disposed of by a unit that took care of that particular activity. The one we brought in, the Marine we brought in, oddly enough, was a former college football player, and he was a big guy. So we were rotating off who was going to carry part of his poncho and who was going to drag bodies. So we were dragging a while, and we would break, and it would switch off, and we'd carry him a while. And of course, he's moaning and groaning and whining and carrying on in a terrible way, enough to bring out any enemy to find us. But we're carrying him. It's getting more comical as we go, because he's really, you could tell he's hurt, but he isn't mortally wounded. As turned out, he had been shot in the hip. Not even in the hip. The bullet had just glazed the outer edge of his hip muscle. And here we are carrying this big lug on this poncho. It's 100 degrees at night and humid enough that you could cut it with a knife. And so as we're coming in, the enemy starts following us in and firing on us. So we would go a ways. When the enemy would fire, we would get down and wait for them to reload or their ammo to get low. And when they would let up, we'd get up and go again. And we're coming in, and they called in a chopper for this guy. And so the chopper has made it in. It's set down on the ground near this army compound, and there's a light shines in the area off this compound, so you can see the chopper. And we can see it. The enemy could see it. So they started shooting at the chopper as we got closer. And when the chopper lets it be known that he's not staying on the ground, he's pulling out. The guy jumps up off of the poncho, runs and jumps, catches on the side of the chopper, and rolls himself up in the chopper and says, "I'm going home." And that's where he was going. He was going home. And we carried that guy, we must have carried him 300-400 yards at least in that heat. But the rest of it, we had to laugh about it. It was funny. He got a free ride, I guess. But we did bring the bodies in for count, which was a sad, very sad situation. You tried to numb yourself to it, and for the most part, you had to very quickly, because your survival depended on you being able to separate your emotions from the situation you're in. And the trick was to try to, once you're out of that war zone, to let go of that and become someone who has emotions again. So transitions were hard for these guys. But that was one of our ambush patrols that we went on. The missions continued. We were a group of Marines that really, we saw a lot of action, and there were very few breaks in that action. We operated the ambush patrols for 30 consecutive days and nights, and we became extremely more and more fatigued. one or two of the more memorable situations, I guess, is that we were out on patrol, and we were moving out to set up for an ambush, and we were outside the Viet Cong village, 100 yards or so. And we got the alert to get down that we had movement out in front of us. And we could see the movement. They called in some illumination over that area. And they were often very far distance, really about 350 yards or so. When the illumination went off, the lieutenant said, "Break open the law." I'm a new guy, I don't know what that means. So I opened the law up and I just sit there and wait on an order to shoot it. And the order doesn't come, the order. And where the hell is that law? And I says, "What?" And he goes, "Fire it." And I said, I'm a new guy. I didn't know I was supposed to just pull it and shoot it, And I thought later after that, I was kind of stupid. You're in a battle, you really ought to just fire the thing. But I opened the law. I made my estimations of what I thought it was going to be. And I says, "Where do you want it?" And he says, "I want it in that banana tree downrange." And it was about 350 yards. So I fired the rocket, and I hit the banana tree dead center. I mean, it was a perfect shot. And of course, all these guys are just absolutely amazed that I actually hit the banana tree. They weren't as amazed as I was, but I didn't let on. I'm the new guy. Anyway, we get up and we continue the sweep toward the banana tree. And the firefight eventually ends and we move closer. As we got the banana tree, there was 10 Indians. There was 10 enemies that had located themselves underneath the banana tree, unfortunately for them. And so they were all killed. It was a very deadly shot. It elevated me as far as my relationship with the rest of my team. I became the ace. And so from then on, I fit in with the old guys, and we were able to operate pretty freely as one unit pretty much, pretty easily. But that night we had 16 kills. And it was our job, of course, to drag them back. And we did drag them back. We dragged them back to the Army compound under fire again, meaning that the enemy basically was coming behind us, firing at us, trying to kill us before we got back. We did make it all the way back to the Army compound, and it was an extremely hot night, very humid. The mosquitoes were just horrible. The conditions in Vietnam were just atrocious. I mean, we used a military mosquito spray that virtually could almost eat the skin off of you. And the smell was so strong that there couldn't have been an enemy within 50 yards of you that couldn't smell where you were at. I always laughed about that because I thought all you got to do is just sniff and you'll find us, But the mosquitoes was just eating us up. But we did drag those bodies back, and we brought them in, and they were laying there along a sandbag partition at the Army compound. And my team went over and sat down and leaned against a set of bunkers and decided to catch a little sleep. We hadn't had much rest. And we dozed off and were sleeping, and all of a sudden I wake up to a commotion. And I'm very upset because one of those that we had killed was a 14-year-old girl. And we were devastated about it. I mean, we were heartbroken about it. But here's these Army engineer people who have never been out there and done any kind of combat activity. And they had decided they were going to rape this corpse. I came off the ground with my rifle, as did my squad leader. And we forcibly removed those men from that situation and tried to respectfully put the young lady back with the rest of her people. The following morning, our captain came down and he's quite excited. His team's had a great night, so to speak. And he comes around, he's congratulating us on the fact that we had finally captured or killed the 14-year-old spy who had been setting up many of our units around that area for ambush and getting them killed. So they had basically been trying to capture her for some time. We didn't feel too good about the accolades for that. I had 14-year-old sisters at home. It was very difficult. But it was even more difficult when the captain, who was a very unlikable person in the first place, he orders the bodies brought out in the road and stacked up in a pile, which the Army people did. We didn't do it. They dragged them out, they stacked them in a pile. The captain climbed to the top of that pile, stood in a Napoleon pose, and had a photograph taken. It was one of the most disgusting things I've ever experienced in my whole life. We wanted to shoot him. It was just, that wasn't what Americans were like. That wasn't what we were supposed to be like. It shouldn't be that way. But then he ordered the bodies placed on the truck and then driven through the local Viet Cong village where many of them would come from, and had the bodies tossed out among the people during the daylight where they would see them, which was even worse in my mind. You know, those were someone's brothers or sisters or fathers or whatever. But that image of him and what he did stayed with me the rest of the time I was in Vietnam. I developed an immense hate for this man. I just despised him, everything about him. So we had another mission where we were out, and they'd sent a new lieutenant to go out with us. He had gotten out of training. This was his first mission in Vietnam. And we're operating in a similar area, that location. As we're going out, we get in a firefight, and we call it an illumination. And there's, again, more wounded Viet Cong laying scattered across the battlefield ahead of us. As we stood up and began our sweep toward these enemy soldiers, one of them was wounded extremely badly. Obviously, he was going to die. He was very badly wounded, but he's trying to surrender. And he repeatedly said in Vietnamese, he wanted to surrender, please don't shoot. Well, this lieutenant ordered my squad to open up on this Vietnamese in full automatic, that he may be booby-trapped. And so, to my amazement, the entire platoon did just that, except for me. I wouldn't fire. And the body was just blown into pieces. There was very little of him left when the shooting was over. But the lieutenant had seen that I hadn't fired. And so he came in a rage towards me, wanting to know why I had not fired. And I stood there and I'm face to face with him, and he's so angry that he's literally slobbering and spitting as he would speak. And he said, "I am commanding you to fire on that Viet Cong." And I said, "I do not answer. I answer to a higher authority than you, and I will not fire on that. I didn't come here to murder people." And so he pulled out his pistol, cocked it, stuck it in my face, and he said, "You will fire on that or I will kill you where you stand." I had a very dead stare at him that probably was about as dangerous as his gun if the gun wasn't there. But I remember that I honestly didn't care if he pulled the trigger or not. I'd seen enough. I'd experienced enough. I knew I could never forget. And I just didn't care. And I said, "I will not fire on that body." Well, suddenly my squad leader came from out of the side. I just happened to see his hand mostly as he jammed his hand between the hammer on the gun and twisted the gun away from the lieutenant and yelled at him and said, "He was low on ammo, Lieutenant. That's why he didn't fire." And so that at least gave the lieutenant some rationale to back down. And he did, but he was extremely angry and very dangerous. It would be many years later and many flashbacks, thousands of them, before I would one day finally stay in that particular scene in my mind to realize that he actually pulled the trigger. And it was simply the difference between my squad leader's skin on his hand that he didn't kill me. But to me, it was something that it's one of the more prouder things I did. I could not just kill someone in cold blood. That wasn't me. I wasn't there for that purpose. And so it was a defining line and a defining moment for me to know that the Marine Corps had broken me in many ways, but I still at least had that part of my conscience left that I could be proud of. That lieutenant was never in the field again. I never really knew exactly why. I'm sure he probably was either moved or there was a lot of anomalies that happened in the Vietnam War that didn't happen in other wars. And one of those was that sometimes you got shot by friendly fire. Sometimes if you're a lieutenant like that, you got shot by your own men. And that probably would have been a situation there where he would have been shot by his own men had they left him in the field with us. But the next morning, we're back in the rear position and we're kind of cleaning our gear and stuff. And some of the men are kind of questioning why I didn't why I didn't fire. It was such a simple thing to do. The guy was dead anyway. What's a big whoop? Why didn't you shoot? And I tried to explain to them that, why I didn't do it. And I thought it to be an illegal order. And explained to them, you guys know I'm with you, I've been out here every battle, every firefight. I did my part. I just couldn't do that. And to my surprise, they all recognized and admitted that they shouldn't have fired, and they wished they hadn't fired. And so it changed a whole dynamic among us. Uh, Generally, that could have been an issue of a war crime. And having one man that didn't fire uh, wasn't good in a situation of a war crime. So it was a moment that had to be handled very delicately for my own protection, because sometimes I would have been killed by friendly fire too. So we worked it out. We worked it out. You know, we had it worked out. The lieutenant was never in the field again. And in fact, I don't recall us ever having an officer with us after that. Our sergeants were pretty much our commanding field officers, and we operated in that particular manner. We had gone on for many, many, many nights. It was Thanksgiving came up, and we'd been in the field so long that we hadn't had any hot food. We hadn't had really any food much at all, but sea rations, they called them, from World War II. And even then, we only got 2 of those a day. And you got a little tired, a little hungry after a time, you know, you got weak. And I remember I was sitting leaning against a tent pole, and realizing that even though I was raised in a Southern Baptist home, by definition, I didn't really feel myself to be a Christian. I believed there was a God, but I hadn't really prayed a lot. I hadn't really done anything about that. But that day I said a prayer, and I asked God to please give us one night to rest. And I kind of let it go at that. But in my heart, I was hoping that when the time came for us to saddle up and roll out, we would actually have a Thanksgiving to stay back in the rear. But when the order came for us to saddle up, was moving out, same missions, ambush patrols, sweep in the morning, you know, the whole ordeal. And my heart sunk about as far as it could sink. It was a sense that there really wasn't any God after all for me, or that if there was, God wasn't going to listen to me anyway. So we move out through the jungles, and for some reason we're even going farther out than we normally did. And we made a huge sweep out through the jungle area, and was swung around back to another direction, and we came to a large rice paddy that we had to actually wade through. And I remember we stepped out on this thing, and it's full of all forms of excrement that you can imagine to make the rice grow. And the water's dirty and it stinks. And we're wading through, holding our weapons up over our heads and trying to come out the other side. And we eventually do. And so we're all wet, and now we've got the heat. We've got our own perspiration. We got way more mosquitoes than we even knew existed at this point, just because of the added smell, I think. But we all came out the rice paddy, and without incident, we kept moving through the jungle. And then finally we broke out of the jungle, and off in the distance was the Army Engineering Battalion post that we often had to take our kills back to. And we moved on to that Army compound. And when we got there, the gate swung open. We all just kind of went in single file. And as we came in, a group of Army soldiers met us and took us to a place where each of us had a bed. Something we hadn't seen forever. And come around, they brought hot coffee, all the coffee we could possibly want. And they brought a lot of hot chow. And we ate till we were full. In the years since then, I've come to realize, for me at least, that was my first communion. It was take and eat. This is my body. And take and drink. This is my blood shed for you. But my heart was greatly lifted to realize that there really was a God. And that as far as the Marine Corps was concerned anyway, he did quite a miracle. He stopped the war just for one night. I was very deeply moved by it. And it's been a spiritual situation for me ever since. Something I've gone back to from time to time in life to try to keep myself grounded. Once we moved out away from the Army compound, we were basically loaded into trucks to a new position. We were going to be out of the field and in more of a rear position, which was always somewhat restful. And they put us on a bridge that kind of overlooked three Vietcong villages that we operated out of. For me and my squad leader, we kind of grabbed the best bunker we could find, which was on the end of the bridge. And there was one on each end of the bridge and then one in the center of the bridge. The center position was intended to be there for explosives to be basically dropped into the water. They exploded C4 explosives every hour, and that prevented swimmers from coming up and blowing out the bridge. It was a main thoroughfare for basically Highway 1 that ran between Da Nang and the north in Vietnam. When we got set up in our positions, we were pretty comfortable, I think. It was nice not to have to go out in the field every day for sweeps and every night for ambushes, so we were kind of laid back. The first day we're there, that evening when they began blowing the explosives, sometime during the night, the individual was injured because the way they operated the explosives was that each person, after they blew their explosive, was supposed to wire the next one and drop it over the side into the water so that when the next one came out, all they had to do was push the plunger, blow the explosive, bring a wire for the next person, drop it in the water. Seems like a pretty reasonable way to do it, unless you're Marines, in which case you probably need more direction. But unfortunately, what happened was that during the night, one of the Marines came out to do his particular part of that, and he pushed the plunger. The explosive had been left laying on top of the bunker. The explosive went off in his face. He lost both of his hands. His face was very badly injured. His chest was very badly injured. And he was in critical condition. Unfortunately, because of where this bridge was located and because of all the enemy activity in the area, medevac choppers would not land there during the night. And so unfortunately for him, he had to basically try to make it to daylight. They gave him what morphine they had on board with each of them. Morphine was not the greatest pain reliever in the world, and it did very little for severe pain. But they gave him morphine and they moved him out of the way because in the Marine Corps, life goes on and war goes on, and you continue what your role is. So basically, the explosives continued every hour on the hour for the rest of the night. Unfortunately for the Marine, he was in horrendous pain. He was screaming pretty much all night long, at least until it got quiet during the night and we knew he'd passed away. One of the things that happened when we rotated out of the role of doing the ambushes and the daily sweeps for enemy was another platoon took over for us. The platoon was Bravo Company. It was another, basically just another company of the 1st Battalion at 26 Marines. They went out on their first night and walked across the dike between two rice paddies. Unfortunately, there was an ambush there set up for them. The Vietnamese or Viet Cong came up out of the water firing and basically caught them in a crossfire and killed every single man in the platoon. For Carlson and myself, Carlson was the squad leader. And Carlson had been in Vietnam almost his full 13 months. He had a few weeks to go. And his best friend had come into the Marine Corps with him. They'd gone through basic training, boot camp together, came to Vietnam together, and just ended up in different platoons, but they remained friends. His best friend happened to be on that patrol that replaced us that night. And his name was Frenchie, and he was one of the people that was killed. Carlson was so distraught, so upset by what had happened that we happened to have an M60 machine gun in our bunker. He grabbed the machine gun, loaded the machine gun, and began to fire into a monastery in a Viet Cong village, which laid about 400 or 500 yards, I suppose, upriver from where we were. He fired and was just basically blowing things to pieces. They'd called in illumination, which were phosphorus shells that basically, when they exploded, they emitted light over a battlefield. And they would float down with small, I started to say umbrellas, but I guess it would have been something different. But they floated down anyway, very slowly. That illumination allowed us to see both the battlefield in a distance where the platoon had been wounded, and were able to see this village reasonably well, that what was going on. Carlson basically fired until there was no ammo left to fire, and he pretty much decimated the monastery, the pagoda. Much of the village was destroyed, and we were expecting many casualties the following day. The other platoon that had basically come in and backed up the unit that was caught in the platoon or caught in the crossfire were able to eventually get that unit evacuated by daylight. And we were on the end of the bridge waiting for whatever was going to happen with our particular detail. Uh, an officer showed up, sent out a patrol to assess the damage that was done in the pagoda uh, and in the VC village. The significance, I think, of the pagoda and the village is that we often watched monks come out of the monastery and go into the pagoda daily to pray. And that night, it was an odd situation where we saw one monk go in and another and another and another and another until there was 10, 12 of them had gone into this small pagoda, which ultimately was pretty much destroyed by the M60 gunfire. That imagery stayed with me for many years when I would see it in flashbacks. And the odd thing about flashbacks is that they're very, very intense memories that essentially are so realistic. You are back in the same setting, the same situation that you were in that particular moment. Everything's the same: the smell, the sound, the lighting. Everything is essentially the same. The feel of it is always the same when you go back into flashback and review these things. And that was one of the scenes that, for whatever reason, at the time I didn't understand, I kept reliving over and over and over again. It would at some point, because I was working on a distance learning program, I sat in on a presentation by the CEO of Ford, and they'd been doing some distance training with their employees for some time, and so I went to a workshop, and I'm sitting there in a workshop, and he's going on, and I drifted off into one of my flashbacks, and suddenly I was brought back to the moment there in the workshop when he says, "What is missing from this picture?" And it was like a bolt of lightning. It hit me. After all these years, I realized it's not what I'm seeing, it's what I'm not seeing that's important. And so from that point on, I went back, and when I would be in these flashbacks, I would spend more time. I would look around in these flashbacks, and I would try to determine what was missing from what my senses had perceived. In the pagoda and in the village, it turned out that what was missing was these people weren't found, so they went somewhere. As it turned out, there was a tunnel in the pagoda. As they went in, they each went into a tunnel. The same happened in the village. That's why there was no casualties. They had all gone underground. And that was something we didn't really even know about at the time we were in Vietnam. We didn't realize how sophisticated their tunnel systems were and how many they had. But they were pretty proficient about it. We even found out later on that we operated our ambushes out of some of their grave sites, which were these large mounds that were about 10 foot across, and they had a circle around them. And we were set up in these because it gave us pretty good cover. When we would have ambushes where we knew enemy should have been killed, but we couldn't find them, it didn't occur to us that they didn't just disappear. We were Marines, I guess. We weren't supposed to think. But as it turns out, many of those grave sites were probably tunnel entrances that they had a way to enter the tunnels and disappear. Some of the tunnels they found after the war were big enough to drive trucks through. That area, I would guess, were pretty much just for the resupply of troops out into the jungle, and were reasonably small, but they were big enough for people to disappear in. But that's what I found in the flashback from the bridge. From the bridge, we were loaded into trucks to go to the next location it would be in. There was one overnight stop in which I was sitting out on a listening post down mountain from where we were basically set up in a group of bunkers that circled this particular mountaintop. Down, down, down mountain basically was nothing but a rock pile that we climbed down through and set up in, and waited to see what was going to happen to radio back for our troops on top of the mountain to either be prepared for an attack or to respond some other way. But as we're sitting down there about midnight, well, sometime after midnight, during the night, missiles began to fire at the base of the mountain, and there were several volleys of missiles that were set off and fired into the Da Nang Air Force base that was used. Obviously, if you have missiles, you have North Vietnamese Army and probably a massive amount of troops. We also were in the early part of the Tet New Year season, and the Tet was when the Viet Cong and an NVA mounted most of their larger assaults. So when those missiles went off, we knew things were going to be very hot for a while. I and the individual with me began to make our way back up the mountain. We were trying to radio to them that we were coming in. For whatever reason, they were not getting that radio communication, and the men on the hill began to fire toward the missiles and at us. We basically were crawling underneath their fire as bullets would zip by our heads and finding our way up the mountain. We did eventually get their attention, get a ceasefire to them, and were able to go ahead and get back into the mountain before they began calling in heavy artillery, M60 or calling in the F-16 jets, and naval guns offshore began to just pummel that entire area with round after round after round all night long. And when daylight came, one of the small hills that was close to us was pretty much nothing but dirt. They had decimated it with the big shells. From there, we moved to at least my last stop in Vietnam was called Hai Van Pass. And Hai Van Pass was an area that had been cut through the mountainside. It was a shorter route for many of the civilians and military units to move from Da Nang across this mountain area up through the pass and into Hue City and a little farther north. Unfortunately, the Marine Corps, as they often have done while I was there anyway, the decisions that they made in terms of personnel seemed to be pretty unrealistic. And they began to drop us off at positions that were 5 to 10 miles apart up through the pass, and were expected to hold these positions at all costs. We were dropped on a bridge, and it was our responsibility to see that they did not blow that bridge and basically destroy the ability to use that road for military purposes. We weren't too concerned about the civilian population's use of the road, but it was a military route that was for resupply, and so we were intended to keep this thing open. When we got to this position, there was already one bunker that was built. It really wasn't big enough to accommodate all 5 of us that were there. So Carlson, my squad leader, and I decided we'll build our own bunker, and we had sandbags and we filled them, and we built a pretty nice little place. We had it set up so that we could get inside and pretty much were covered all the way around in terms of any kind of fire. And we had an area that we could shoot from that gave us some cover. A lot of things happened at Hai Van Pass that were surreal. It was just one of those places that At least Carlson and myself had some sense that this was not going to be a good place for us. We began to double up our nightly watches so that two men were awake at all times at night, holding his position, watching his positions. During the day, the traffic flow would start sometime about an hour after daylight, and it would run almost nonstop until about an hour before dark. And no movement of any kind happened during night. That's when the enemy moved about through the mountains, and basically most of the fighting in Vietnam occurred at night. That too was something that I guess was a holdover from Vietnam when I was basically at home, was that when sunset came and dark came on, with it came the anxiety of knowing or sensing that danger is near. And it took many, many years to begin to overcome that sensation and where I could get back to enjoying a pretty night, enjoying watching the sunsets. But that time did eventually come. But on High Von Pass, the significance of it in my life was that we basically were set up there, the 5 men, and we had one man who realized that the radio communications had been cut shortly after a rocket had come in on the roadway that we were on. The rocket was a phosphorus rocket, which kind of confused us to some degree because the enemy was not supposed to have these phosphorus rockets, and they were horrible, horrible weapons. These phosphorus rockets, if they got on the skin, they could not be put out. They burned, and they burned endlessly. You could not put the phosphorus out until it destroyed everything that it touched. So that got our attention that we had a problem. We thought perhaps some of our guys had overfired the mountainside into our position. But shortly after that, then enemy rockets began to come in, and we realized we were under attack. As we basically took our positions in the bunkers, we began to take on enemy firefighting, and that's what we did. We were returning fire on the mountainside. One of the other Marines, his name was Gomez, had been, he was a very funny man, but was also someone who was pretty unreliable. He never knew where his equipment was. He was never prepared for any situation. He didn't handle himself well under the stress of a firefight. So he was kind of unpredictable. And this particular time, he was very unpredictable. He had lost his rifle. He had lost his flak jacket. And so he's out there screaming for help. For whatever reason, I decided to go help him. And I go out and I low walk behind a wall of sandbags because I had remembered I had seen his flak jacket and rifle strung across this particular bunker sandbag. So I grabbed the flak jacket, I grab his rifle, I get to him and he's totally panicked. I try to calm him down and I start putting the flak jacket on him, hand him his rifle, and I'm trying to help him fix the flak jacket in place when suddenly an 82 millimeter rocket explodes 5 feet behind me. The proximity of that was devastating. What I felt basically was an intense heat that was like nothing that I could even really fully describe. It was like standing in the gates of hell. It was just an incredible sensation of heat. The pain that came from numerous injuries that I had, where I was hit 14 times, was equally intense. As the pain rushed to my brain, I felt like the top of my head was just going to just blow completely out. Uh, it was such an intensity, it's almost impossible to describe. But the force of the concussion from the rocket knocked me onto one hand. Oddly enough, did not knock me all the way over. Uh, but as I decided to review my situation and began to look at myself in terms of how badly I was wounded, Gomez was in pretty good shape. He had one piece of shrapnel in one of his jaws. I had basically taken all of his shrapnel. And as I looked down, my right arm was pretty much shredded. Uh, it was completely destroyed from the elbow down. Bones were sticking out through the skin, and the hand no longer worked. I was right-handed, and my rifle was laying on the ground where my hand released it when I was wounded. As I looked back to look for the uh, crater from the rocket, I saw that my right shoulder had been blown out. Part of the bone had been blown away. Uh, I felt pain, intense pain in my low back. I saw that my boot was blown out. The toes of my boot was blown out. And so I had pain coming from that area, from my lower legs, from my buttocks, from my low spine. And so I was wounded very badly and was in very critical condition. Uh, the one thing I had realized really from all the time I'd been there was that people died because they usually went into shock. And so I was intent on not going into shock. And I had made up my mind that I would do whatever I had to do to try to avoid going into shock. I began to use the amount of pain that I was experiencing and the absolute anger and rage that I felt both at the Vietnamese for wounding me and at the Marine Corps for putting me in a position like that to be wounded. I used that rage and that pain to keep me awake and alert enough to avoid going into shock. I looked to Gomez to help me get out of the line of fire because I was still out on the edge of the road where enemy fire from the mountainside could finish killing me, I guess. I looked to Gomez, and Gomez was very panicked. He was just turning in circles. He didn't know what to do. And so suddenly he decides to run. And he says, I'm going to get help. I try to stop him so that he can remain there and help the wounded. I wasn't the only one wounded there. But he ran, and I basically picked up my weapon with the intent to shoot him if he didn't stop, but couldn't do that to one of my own men. As I looked around, there was an ARVN soldier and a South Vietnamese regular army soldier, a lieutenant, who had somehow ended up at our position that none of us really knew why he was there or how he got there. Or it was just one of those really odd situations in this crazy, crazy thing they called war. He just didn't seem to belong there. But he had been extremely severely wounded. His entire face had been blown off. He was sitting in a hunched position against the sandbags facing the rocket when it exploded, and it devastated his body. And yet he was still breathing. Just things that happened that defied description at times, and that was one of them. You could hear him breathing. The blood filling his lungs was kind of gurgling, but he remained somewhat alive. I guess the autonomic system of his brain was just fighting to stay alive. The other Marine that was at that position was my corpsman. His name was Gott, Doc Gott, we called him. And Doc had been sitting on a 5-gallon bucket at the edge of one of the bunkers. and he'd been kind of guarding our flank. Uh, when I realized I had no one to help me get out of the road, it became uh, realistic that I was going to have to do it myself. And so I leaned over and managed to get down on my stomach, and I used my elbow and my rifle to pull myself slowly, one pull at a time, until I was able to take my body inside the edge of a bunker where I was out of the line of fire. As I rolled onto my back, I realized that I was paralyzed from the waist down and was injured much worse than I thought. To my surprise, I was looking at the wounds on my body and realized I wasn't bleeding. That puzzled me to no end, to think that you could be hit that many times and not be bleeding. It was later explained to me by people in trauma centers that the heat from the rocket metal, because it was so close when it exploded, had basically cauterized the arteries when they were cut, and they didn't bleed any further, which basically saved my life. As I lay there, I tried to get Doc Gott to give me some assistance. And I told him, Doc, I need help. I'm badly wounded. And he said, Bloom, I can't help you. He would just continue to rock. And I kept looking at him and I'm going, Doc, I really need some help. And this Arvin needs help. You got to help us. And he just kept rocking. And he said, I can't help you this time, Bloom. I can't help you. I was a little angry at him. I recall now that I felt a great deal of anger because he was the corpsman, and I'd watched him work in the field so many times that this just was out of character for him. He was the go-to man. He always went to the wounded. This time he wasn't helping. As I lay there, my squad leader, who had been in the bunker that I'd left to help Gomez, came running across the road, kind of stooped over, and I called to him and asked him to come and help. Carlson turned. He stopped very briefly. He looked at the situation and then continued to run across the road and down over the side of the hill and back into the culvert which made up the bridge where he hid. It was very, very, I guess, distraughting to realize that you're in a situation now where you have no one to help. You're on your own. Well, I continued to try to talk to Doc Gott, but in a little while he pitched over and he fell pretty much in front of the Arvin, and that's where he lay, just beyond my reach. His shoulder, where he had taken around through the shoulder and through his lung and parts of his chest, had hit an artery, and the blood was squirting out of his shoulder with each heartbeat. So it was a tough situation because I wanted so much to try to help him. I wanted to try to reach the shoulder and the artery and try to put some pressure on it, try to save his life, but I couldn't move. I simply physically could not move to reach him. He very slowly went into a brief coma, or at least went unconscious at the time. And I'm there alone in this situation, trying to figure out how I'm going to survive now. After a bit, Doc did begin to moan a little bit and started repeating the Catholic Rosary over and over again. I guess he came to the realization that being a corpsman, he was wounded to the point that he wasn't going to survive. And so he was saying the rosary as part of his passing. The day was very, very long. We were wounded sometime, and I suppose well before dark at least, because the traffic had stopped. And as I lay there, the green flies began to swarm. And a lot of skin and blood had been blown all over the sandbags around us, and the flies were just swarmed everywhere. And they began to crawl all over the bodies. And, they're crawling down inside my wounds, and it's creating even more intense pain than I was already feeling. I still continued to use the anger and the rage and the pain to force myself to stay awake. I knew I had to stay awake, and so I tried very hard to stay awake. I remember sometime during this process, this period, that it's only a week till Christmas, and I really had so wanted to try to make it past Christmas so that it didn't affect my family so much. And so I did once again pray for the second time in Vietnam that God would allow me to die on American soil, and that he would try to let this situation not destroy the family Christmas. Christmas was a time in my family, one of the few times when things were happy. People actually knew joy. The rest of the year seemed pretty bad, but Christmas was a time of joy. Christmas trees, candy, and I just hated to see this happen now. And that was my prayer, was that God would allow me to die, at least in America, which I assumed would get me back past Christmas. The saga continued for quite some time. I continued to try to fight off the effects of the injuries and the shock that's beginning to overtake me. I basically eventually did fade just a little bit and was aroused by some men that were kneeled at my feet, and it was a squad who had come to try to assist us. The lieutenant gave me a cigarette and let me know that he was there to help, and that he was one of ours, because we had Vietnamese coming down off the mountain, yelling at the time, GI, hey GI, we kill you now GI. We were coming in, we're going to take you prisoner GI. And the one thing that in the 126 that you didn't want was to ever be taken prisoner. There was a so-called bounty had been placed on that unit, a very high bounty, dead or alive, for men that they could capture and torture. And that's what they did if they got a hold of somebody. So you really didn't want to ever be taken alive. My thoughts as I lay there was that I would at least try to take as many with me as I could when they came in. I was so pleased when I realized that the man standing there with me was not Vietnamese, and he was one of the Marines in a small squad who had come to assist. There were 4 of them altogether. The lieutenant did manage to give me 2 morphine shots, which I refused any additional because I knew the morphine would make me sleepy. And so I really didn't want any more than that. I would tolerate as much pain as I could tolerate and try not to go into shock. The lieutenant was basically trying to get us to some kind of safety. We were in an open area where it was indefensible. It was indefensible when we got there, and it still was. There was an outcropping of rock that came off over the mountain and hung over the road about 100 yards to the south, on the south part of the road. The lieutenant had looked at that and said, we have to move these men to the outcropping and try to get back under the rocks out to safety. So they took out poncho liners and they rolled over the Arvin first onto a poncho, and they picked him up and they ran toward the outcropping, and there wasn't any fire from the mountain, so they got him over there okay, and they ran back. They put the poncho on the ground and put Doc God on it, and they basically picked it up and they ran across that opening again and were able to get Doc God to safety. And they came back, and then they rolled me onto the poncho face down, which was just hellaciously painful. Just any movement. The pain was so intense that I literally sipped air. I breathed so shallow that only enough oxygen to just keep myself alive, because the movement of the chest was so painful. Any kind of movement was painful. So when they rolled me over onto the poncho, it was extreme, incredibly extreme pain. But they got me on it. The lieutenant said, we're going to pick him up and we're going to go back to the outcropping with him. Well, they picked me up, and about halfway across, they dropped me. But as soon as we came out of the opening behind the sandbags, the enemy opened up on us running across. Even though they let the others go, they opened fire on me and these 4 men. And as I was laying face down on the poncho, I could see the bullet holes going through the poncho around me, and could hear them hitting, and I could see them hitting in the dust in the road. They were laying down a pretty heavy fire on us. Amazingly, they didn't hit any of the 4 Marines, and to my knowledge, they didn't hit me either. God was watching over me, I guess, and they got me over to the outcropping, and had laid me there on the ground beside Doc God. I had told them that Carlson was in the culvert, and they went back and were able to bring Carlson out without any further enemy fire and get him to the outcropping as well. A staging area to try to bring in medevacs to get us out. The lieutenant got on the radio and was radioing for any available medevac in the area. There was an area, a small area, but it was something that they could set the chopper down on and evacuate us out. Most of the calls came back negative, that they would not come in. That area was hot. It was a hot zone, and we only had one who was willing to come in at all. So that chopper came flying in. Basically, we had on that side of us a very sharp cliff that dropped to the sea, probably 500-600 yards to sea. And so the choppers would come in a little low and try to come up and sit down on this flat. This chopper successfully did it. He came in, we could hear him, we're thinking, oh, we're out of here. We're going to get out of here. Finally, this day's going to end here. The chopper came in and sat down. The lieutenant ordered them to take the 2 dead guys over, put them on the chopper, and that's what they did, because Doc God had died at this point. They've got them on the chopper, and the chopper began to take so much fire that he had to pull up and pull away. and those that were wounded and still alive were still on the ground. We're in a position, a very bad position at this point. Uh, the day has really gone really bad, but we're beginning to see some humor in this thing by now. It's one of those type of things where anything could go wrong just seemed to be going wrong. The lieutenant was very determined to get us out. So he's on the radio basically screaming at these pilots, trying to entice another pilot to come in. He finally found another pilot who said he would come in and try to sit down. He said, I'll fly in low and I'll come in and try to come up and sit down and get those guys out of there. He didn't even make it quite to the landing before they began to fire rockets at him, and he just rolled down and out of sight, and he was gone. And we're just basically really didn't know what to think about this at this point. The lieutenant was persistent. He continued to stay on the radio. He finally got a third pilot to agree to come in. He told us how he would do it. He would come in very low from the sea. He would come in all the way to the bottom of the cliff. He would come straight up, sit down all at once, and they were to have us ready to load and get us on there before the enemy had time to basically disrupt the evacuation. That's exactly what happened, sort of. The pilot did fly in low. We could hear him. The chopper really echoed when he came in close to the cliff, and so we could hear him very well, but unfortunately so could the enemy. He was a very, very skilled pilot. There was no question about it. The area he was landing in was pretty small, and he was going to have to do it under fire, and he knew that. But yet he tried, and he brought the chopper up, and he managed to get it almost to the ground when the rocket fire became so heavy, and you could hear the bullets striking the chopper, and he just said, "I'm sorry, guys, I gotta go." And he rolled the chopper down off of the cliff and out of sight, and away he went. So here we are laying here. It's dark now, and almost dark anyway, and we have no way out. We're trying to figure out whatever other possibilities is there, and for some reason out of nowhere, Gomez says, "Hey, there's a Jeep over here." Well, we had no idea where a Jeep came from. There wasn't one there when the firefight originally started, so we didn't know where it came from. But Gomez says, "There's a Jeep over here and the keys are in it." He says, "I'll just drive you guys out." And so we thought that was just about the stupidest idea we ever heard, but it was the only one we had left. We'd go with it. So they loaded me on the back of the Jeep. It was a two-seater, and there was just a small piece of metal across the back, about 2 foot wide. And they got me up and laid me on there, of which the very motion of it was excruciatingly painful. But they had laid me on the back of the Jeep. They'd been sitting in the hot sun all day, so it was scalding hot. When my skin hit it, it was just incredibly painful. They put Carlson in the passenger seat. He had been wounded in the right shoulder. As it turned out, he had taken a round and punctured a lung, and so his wound didn't hit an artery, so he wasn't bleeding out. But he was severely wounded as far as his injury. They decided collectively that Gomez would drive us out. So Gomez jumps in the driver's seat, and he says, "Now what do I do?" And we just, "What do you mean, what do we do?" And he says, "I've never driven a stick shift before. I don't know how to drive this thing." So today is just great, So we actually start laughing on this one, and we finally tell him, you start the thing, you push in the clutch, you start the thing, you put in first gear, and then you let the clutch out slowly and give it gas and so on. He starts to try to do this, and he pops the clutch and nearly rolls me off the back of the Jeep. I chipped up and was almost off the back of the Jeep by the time he got the clutch back in before he stalled the Jeep out. The Jeep unfortunately had rolled out from under the outcropping, and we were sitting on the outside of the cropping where the enemy was up over top of us. Apparently they were looking for us over the other side and hadn't opened up on us yet. So Carlson's trying to explain to Gomez that, look, dummy, all you have to do is when I tell you to push the clutch in, you push it in. I'll shift the gears. You drive, and let's get out of here. Gomez finally got the Jeep started again. He's extremely nervous, but he gets it started, and they get in first gear. Gomez eases the clutch out this time, and we're still a little jerky, but we take off. We get it at least into high gear, and we're finally rolling towards safety. We're rolling along, and Gomez says, "Hey, Bloom." He said, "Knock, knock." And I just lay there. He goes, "Knock, knock, Bloom." And I said, "What are you doing, Gomez?" He said, "Knock, knock, man. Knock, knock jokes." I said, "I'm not doing knock, knock jokes with you." And I don't even remember what the joke was anymore, but it actually was funny enough that we began to laugh. So that started Gomez and some of his wild, crazy stories, and he had us laughing so hard by the time we finally got out of there that it was just one of those kind of days. We finally get up to the headquarters where they're going to bring in another chopper for evacuation, which will be number 4, I guess. And they get us in there, and they lay me off on a stretcher next to the edge of the road. And Carlson was able to lean against a truck there. And Gomez, of course, he's regaling his story of how he had saved the day with some of the other troops that had gathered around. And in a little while, the captain came down, the same captain who had climbed on all the bodies and became Napoleon, the same captain that I had grown to hate immensely for all the things that he'd done, and for putting me in a situation where I had no chance to survive. So the anger, just to hear his voice, just it kept me alive, but it also really began to boil up inside of me. He goes over and he congratulates Gomez, and he congratulates Carlson on the fine job they did holding the bridge. And then he comes over and he kneels down beside me and slaps me in the chest and says, "Good job, Marine." I only had the one hand, but I mustered every ounce of strength I had left. And as he leaned over my body, I punched him in the face as hard as I could. And I knocked him completely back on his back in the dirt. His mouth and his nose is bleeding profusely, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. The guys are sitting back there trying not to laugh out loud, and the captain is furious. He's jumps up and he's going to jump on top of me and beat me half to death, or maybe beat me to death, I guess. And so they pulled him off of me, and they calm him down, and Carlson tells him, "Look," he says, he's full of morphine, and he's hallucinating. He thinks you're one of the gooks coming in to get us. He didn't mean to hit you. Well, the captain took that as a way to get out of, I guess, back away from the situation, and he threatens all forms of court-martial, firing squads, the whole 9 yards, but Anyway, he backed away and let that one go. But we heard the chopper coming in, and we got loaded on the chopper, and we were headed out uh, for evacuation. We didn't really know where we'd be evacuated to, but as we flew along, I began to drift in and out of sleep. Um, Eventually, the chopper begins to land, and so I become alert again and realize that we have landed on the USS Hope, which was the Navy ship that cruised offshore and was really a full trauma hospital. And we were lucky actually to get the Hope because most of the uh, in-country hospitals weren't quite as well equipped. They came on board the chopper with a triage team almost immediately, and they looked Carlson or looked Gomez over and told him, you're good to go." And they told the crew on the ground to take him to OR triage bed 1. They worked with Carlson. They were able to get him bandaged, his arm in a sling, and they told the uh, troops to take Carlson to OR triage bed 2. It took them forever to get enough bandages on me or seemingly forever anyway, to get me bandaged up well enough to begin to move me. And so they got me down out of the chopper, and they said, take him to OR triage bed 3. Well, it was so good to just be anywhere that wasn't Vietnam. On a U.S. ship, it seemed somewhat comforting to all three of us that we were out. We were going to get help. In the OR triage, the triage team came in, and they prepped Gomez for surgery. And in a short time, they took Gomez off to surgery. It's probably about an hour later, he comes back. Pardon me. Pardon me. Gomez comes back, and he's basically they're using the triage also as the recovery. And so he's brought back and put back in his bed, in bed 1. Well, actually, they were wheeling us out in the beds is what happened. They went to Carlson, and same thing. They prepped him for surgery, and eventually took Carlson away to surgery. He's gone probably an hour and a half, 2 hours or more. And I still haven't even been given any pain medication. And I'm just laying there just trying to hang on. Just trying to stay awake and just hang on. Just try to make it. Eventually Carlson comes back, and he's in recovery. He hasn't quite come to us yet, but eventually begins to come around. Here's 3 of us in this brightly lit room. 2 of them had surgery. I was awaiting surgery. And they brought dinner in for Carlson and for Gomez. Gomez's jaw had been wired shut. So to his dismay, his dinner came in pureed with a straw in it. And of course he's fussing about trying to use a straw to eat his dinner. Well, very sad when he finds out that he'll be doing that for at least 2 months. They brought Carlson's dinner in and propped him up on the bed, and Carlson swung out over the edge, and he sees me laying there on the bed, and he says, "What's going on?" He says, "Why hasn't Bloom been taking the surgery?" And he says, "Oh, just eat your dinner. We'll take care of that." Well, no one ever did take care of it. And after a while, uh, Carlson became so furious, he pushed the tray away and slid down off the bed. And he says, "No, no, this is bullshit." And so he starts out the door and he realizes that they've turned the hall lights off. Everybody's gone. There is nobody in OR. They've shut down for the night, and I'm still left in triage. Uh, he begins running up and down the hall, so does Gomez, screaming for a surgeon. They needed a surgeon immediately. Uh, they carried on so long, so loud, that eventually someone came back. One of the surgeons finally came out. He was on call and he came in and wanted to know what was going on. And this drug on again for about another hour. And finally it was decided, all right, we'll take him to surgery. It wasn't for many years later that I realized that what triage really was. It was the determination of who was going to get help when and how, and those that weren't going to be savable, or it just wasn't going to be worth the cost and time to save someone. That was bed 3. I wasn't supposed to make it. I wasn't supposed to get help. But thanks to at least my buddies, they were so annoying that they eventually did take me into surgery. They really weren't expecting me to survive the surgical procedure. And they made it very clear while I was there that I probably would not come through this surgery. I looked at the surgeon who was standing near me. And of course my arm was laying there with the bone sticking out of it, and I can't move the hand. And I looked at him and I says, "Don't cut off my arm." And he looked at me kind of funny, and I said, "I mean it, don't cut off my arm." And he just started laughing, and the others started laughing. And I reached over with the other hand, and I grabbed him by the scrubs, and I pulled him down, and I says, "Do not amputate my arm. I'm a laborer. I make a living with my hands and my back. I've got to have those when I get home." And so they all had a good laugh out of it. And he says, "Son, you're going to be lucky if I can save your life, let alone your arm. But we'll do the best we can." Oddly enough, during the surgical procedure, I had an experience that I have never really told very few people about. But I found myself sometime during this procedure literally floating above the surgical theater where they're working. And I'm actually watching the surgery take place. They have turned me onto my stomach and they're working on my spine. And they're trying to get a piece of shrapnel out of my spine that had gone in and was putting pressure against the spinal cord. Was causing a spinal fluid leak as I heard them talk. And they ended up doing a complete fusion, a laminectomy and fusion, and rods and screws in the back. That terminology is something that was sort of was not in my vocabulary. So it was odd later on when I tried to explain to some doctor when he asked me, "Well, what did they do to you?" And I told him they did laminectomies, fusion, rods and screws. And he wanted to know where I heard that at. And I guess I hadn't even realized it. I'd heard it then. But most people might talk about those things, but it was something I did experience that night. But one other oddity of that situation that I'll share is that my mother, my whole mother's side of the family were, I guess it was an ESP, we would call it. They had this extrasensory perception of things. For my mother, it was something that was very troubling. She didn't want to know things that sometimes were coming. But it was something that was passed down to some of us, and I happened to be one of them. My younger sister was another. And I didn't know until many years later when my mother shared with me when we were talking one day that the night that I was wounded, I came to her bedside and I told her that I had been hurt and that not to worry, that I would be home soon. And a little later on, a few years later, my younger sister, Karen Sue, told me that the exact same thing happened with her. And it was interesting to think that there are things in the world we don't understand that take place. I wanted to try to be home for Christmas, but I wasn't going to make it. But in a way, I guess I at least allayed some of the fears my mother had of my dying. The whole experience on the USS Hope was one that was completely unforgettable. I was in a coma until Christmas Day. In fact, I woke up in ICU Christmas morning. The nurse, when she realized I was awake, immediately called for the doctor. The doctor came. They were very blunt. There was no sugarcoating anything. He said, "Son, you may not make it. We really don't know if you're going to make it yet or not. But if you do, you could very well be paralyzed for the rest of your life, and very possibly you will not be able to have children." I was devastated. Here I was in this ICU, pretty much by myself, was not to think about now, but losing pretty much everything I ever wanted. And dealing with the pain. They did provide much better pain control than I'd had in the past. But I had to spend a lot of time thinking about what am I going to do with the rest of my life. I won't be able to use my hand. I won't be able to use my arm. I've got scars all over my body. I'm probably never going to get married. I'll never be able to have a family. You know, what's worth living for? But something inside of me would just not let me give up. It just would not let me give up. And I fought on. Well, in a few days, they moved me to a regular ward, which in the USS Hope was just the bottom of the ship, basically. And rows of litters and beds stacked 3 high and about 4 across. And here's all these men that have been wounded in these beds at various stages of recovery. I'm still laying flat, no pillow. They don't want to try to take a risk on damaging the spinal cord. So all I can do is pretty much lay there and look up at the bunk overhead and occasionally look out to the side and see somebody. There was music that played on an old tape recorder that the tape had been stretched to the point it was distorted, and it played the same song over and over and over and over, and it was just unnerving for it to go on and on. But the most distinctive thing I remember from that experience was that all of a sudden my eye caught someone walking toward me, and it's another Marine. and he's kind of shuffling his feet as he comes down the center of the aisle toward me. And he has something in his hand. And he walks up to me and says, "How you doing?" And I said, "I really don't know." And he says, "Look at this." He held up this bag. He says, "You know what this is?" And I says, "No, what is that?" He says, "That, my friend, is my guts." He says, "They're putting them back in a little bit at a time." He says, "Now, if I can make it carrying my guts in a bag, you can make it." And he turned around and he shuffled away. And I thought, that's inspiration there. That absolutely was one of the most dumbfounding things I'd ever witnessed. Whether he survived or not, I don't know. It was a few days later they had began to prep me for the journey back to the United States, and so we the entire way out of that hospital for the next step of recovery, or the next process that got you back home, was that you had to be able to use the bathroom. And because of my injuries, I had not been able to use the bathroom on my own. And unless I did, I was not allowed to go. And so I drank about 2 gallons of water, and I was absolutely determined I would be on the next flight off that ship. And I did finally produce enough urine. I convinced them I was ready to go home. And so they did. I did make that flight. But before I left, Carlson and Gomez made it down to see me. That time I was very angry at them. They both left me out there to die. And I was not very forgiving. Told them I never wanted to see them again. And I meant that. And I, for years and years and years, really, I can't say I hated them, but I just never wanted to see them again in my life. Until recently, when I realized this is kind of silly, I think I'll check and see maybe where they're at. Gomez was sort of a ghost. I really think he was probably an undercover Army Central Intelligence person in the first place that they sent in to try to find out who was trafficking drugs and who wasn't. So I don't think he ever really was who he said he was. Carlson, when I looked him up and Googled him, the first thing that came up was a headstone with a picture of his car on it. And he died in 1972, 2 years after he left Vietnam. And I thought, what a waste. What a waste that I let that opportunity get away. Anyway, the whole process of coming home, we went to Okinawa. Well, actually, I'll correct that. We went to Japan on the first flight. And I got to see Bonanza in Japanese, which was quite an experience. They were able to get us, again, the pain under better control. And then we were then flown to our next destination, which was Okinawa. We were there in Okinawa for almost up to New Year's. There was a Bob Hope show going on. Of all the whole ward, I was the only one that wasn't well enough to go watch Bob Hope. So the intern who happened to draw duty with me, he says, "That's all right, we'll catch it on TV." And so he turns the show on TV, and we're watching it, and he was rather creative in his ability to prepare us a cocktail. And he found a few ingredients there that he mixed up and made us a small cocktail to celebrate. And so we're watching Bob Hope with our cocktails. And in the front row of this show are two Marines. One had his left arm amputated, the other had his right arm amputated, and they're sitting side by side in this show. And as the show progressed along, they were applauding, each one slapping the other one's hand. And it was just one more of those things that stuck in memory and let you know that we can do this, you know. You'll get home, we'll figure it out. We'll find a way. They figured out how to clap. For crying out loud, we can do this. So we went from there. The next flight was the longest. They flew us into Fairbanks, Alaska, temperature at 30 below. We were in a military aircraft, one of the C-130s. We were strapped in litters to the side of the wall, wrapped in blankets. Extremely long flight, extremely painful flight. When we landed there, it was already very cold in the plane, but they had cargo to unload and to reload that was going on to an air base in California. And so they dropped the big door down behind, and the big cold air come rushing in, and it was just so painful, it defied description. There wasn't enough blankets in the world that keep that cold from hurting, making the body hurt even more intensely than it had been. Eventually, though, they get everything loaded, they close up the plane, and they do give us enough narcotics to put us to sleep for the rest of the flight, which was kind of nice. We land in California for basically, I'm getting this confused. We land in Chicago. We were not going to California at that point. We were going to Chicago. I was going to be in the hospital at the Naval Air Station, Naval Base in Waukegan, Illinois, just outside Chicago. And so we land there. We are offloaded from the plane directly into buses where the stretchers were again strapped to the side of the bus, and they drove us then to the hospital. The streets were rough. The bouncing was painful, but we were in America. Even the dirty city, the cold, it was different. I was home. The Naval Hospital in Waukegan, I was taken to a neurosurgery ward, and we had, it was a very large ward, probably 150 beds in it, and all degrees of, I guess, incapacity there. All of the people had, for one reason or another, been wounded. Some by friendly fire, some by enemy fire, but some were in much worse shape than others. I was in bed 1. I finally moved up from bed 3, I guess, but I was in bed 1, inside the door, and across from me was a young Marine who had been in a chopper crash. It had broken every single bone in his body, and he was in a cast completely all the way over his head, foot to toe, and the only thing sticking out are lip holes and eye holes. And he just talked away, and He'd been there a while, but he was very positive. He had a very positive outlook on life in spite of everything. So it was interesting. He would strike up a conversation with me and want to know the details of how I got there, and we shared back and forth like that. So, but to see someone who had sustained that much injury uh, and still have hope that this thing could work out uh, was a positive influence on me, and I really appreciated the fact that he was there. The family had been notified of my injuries probably within 24 hours of the time I was actually wounded. I don't really know what transpires because at home, uh, I'm sure they were devastated. Uh, but as you find later in the story as we go, uh, things change a lot, and people don't talk a lot about things. Not in my family, anyway. But anyway, the Marine Corps had invited the family to visit about a week after I got there, I suppose. And they had advised them not to ask about the war, try to keep it lighthearted, keep it short. And I didn't even know they were coming. So I'm laying there in bed, and I've got a cast on my right arm from my upper shoulder and armpit all the way down over my hand. I can't even lift the arm. My feet and legs are bandaged. My back is bandaged, and I'm flat on my back, and it's just very uncomfortable, still tremendous amount of pain. But it was great to see them come in. I mean, it was heartwarming to see them come in. The look on their face pretty much said it all. You don't know what you look like to other people until you read it in their eyes, and you see it on their face, and then you know you're really in trouble here. You got a long way to go, and this is bad. But the one thing that my older sister asked when she was there, they had had Christmas, as Christmas was for them at that time. And she says, well, when you get home, she says, what would you like? And without hesitation, I says, I'd love to see a Christmas tree. And without hesitation on her part, there'll be no Christmas tree. There'll be no Christmas. Christmas is over. That was that. I go, okay. So the conversation kind of got cut short. The family was ushered out, and I just laid there and pondered that a bit, but I figured out what the heck, it is what it is at this point. We take it as it comes. But it was kind of a prelude, I guess, for finding out what peace was going to be like. You survive a war, but then you have to survive the peace. And it doesn't look anything at all like it should. During the stay in the Naval Hospital, they exposed me to some unauthorized experimental surgeries. It just was not always a pleasant place to be either. The military was the military regardless of where you were at. The bad thing about being in a naval hospital there was that there was still a Marine contingent in the barracks on base there, and the colonel who headed up that Marine contingent came in that ward every day and inspected. And the men that could stand were expected to stand at attention. And literally, he would go over each man as to his grooming, decorum. Uh, it was a sight to behold. I developed a rather great distaste for authority figures, especially officers, obviously, at that point. And so the colonel and I did not get along well. The only thing I had going for me was I was bedfast and couldn't get up, so I didn't have to put up with most of it. But the one day he's coming through with his contingent of officers with him that he would trail along behind, and he comes through and he gets to my bed and he goes, "Bloomfield," and I just nod, and he just pulls out Purple Heart and spins it across on the bed and threw it on the bed and says, "Your Purple Heart," and he went on. When he got on down through there, he gave up whatever other items had been brought for the various people, but it was such a heartless way to get a Purple Heart after you'd endured what I'd endured. So it made me dislike him just that much more. As time would go on and I got better, I pushed myself to be able to stand, to be able to walk, and was eventually able to walk on my own. I had a limp, of course, but I was walking. It was extremely painful. The back from that day forward, I guess really from the day I was wounded, even to now, I have known only 1 or 2 days out of that entire period of my time when I've been pain-free. So that was just a situation you had to somehow find a way to live with over time, and I've tried. But anyway, I was able to walk eventually. But all that time, the months that I lay there, I would lay there and I would count the holes in the ceiling tile to pass the time and to keep my mind off the pain. And over time, I was able to realize that I could send the pain to a place in my brain that I didn't have to attend to it all the time. And so I developed my own strategies for how to deal with some of the pain. And I still use that still today, and it became an effective way for me to be able to do functions and be a part of family life and do things when it wasn't as apparent that I was in pain as I was. But at any rate, the way it was done was that you had to go before a review board. I knew that I was getting out of the Marine Corps. They couldn't use you anymore, so they could care less what happened to you from that point on. But you did have to go before a Naval Review Board, and that Naval Review Board would establish your level of disability, and then what type of discharge you would get, and so on. Well, the date had been set for that, and I was aware when it was. And this time I'm somewhat mobile. I still don't stand at attention for the colonel, but that's more my part than his. He just didn't know I couldn't do it. But he comes through, and the hair was getting kind of long. And I'm looking forward to going home. And I'd like to go home with my hair. I came in with hair. I wanted to go out with hair. And the colonel comes through and stops at the bed, and he says, "You need a haircut, Marine." And I said, "Colonel, I'm not getting my haircut." I said, "I'm going home, son." And he says, "You're getting a haircut, Marine." I said, "Colonel, I am not getting a haircut. I'm not doing it." He said, "Well, let me put it to you this way. You will either get a haircut or you won't be going home." And I said, "Well, my review board's already set." He said, "I can change your review board, whatever I want." So when I come through here this next week, your hair better be cut. Well, I struggled with it, and I thought about it, and I fretted with it, and I so wanted to defy that colonel so bad, but I so wanted to go home even more, so I got my hair cut. And the barber shaved it off just like it was when I came in, short as it could be, and I hated it, but at least it kept things moving along. I went before the review board. It was determined by percentages. I had somewhere in the 400% range of injuries and wounds. So oddly, obviously, I was going home with 100% disability, and I was going to be retired out of the Marine Corps with an honorable discharge. I would forget along the way that they actually retired me for a long time. And I didn't realize that with that retirement came a lot of benefits that went with being a retired military person. Base privileges, travel privileges, insurance that I wasn't aware of, a number of things that I wasn't aware of until later on. But I just wanted out of the Marine Corps. I didn't care how I did it. I just wanted out. And so eventually we come down to a time when I really want to go home. We've had the board review. The colonel comes through, and I let him know that I want to go home. And he lets me know that the only way I'm going home is to be discharged as a Marine. And that would be from a Marine barrack. Well, I wasn't in the shape to go to a Marine barracks, and I knew that. But I was going home one way or another. As it turned out, I got to go to the Marine barracks, but I had to go without any pain medication. They refused to give me any form of pain medication. His orders were that if I was able to go home, I was able to go home without pain medication. And so I had about 3 or 4 days in a Marine barracks that was just ungodly bad. If it hadn't been for a master sergeant there who just kind of took me under his wing, kept me hid from the colonel, and put me in positions where I could sit in the bathroom and just stay there and sit and try to just endure the pain rather than have to swab the floors and clean the corners of the windows and just mundane things that the Marine Corps would do. But the colonel would always come looking for me. And so the first sergeant he would always either keep me well hid, or he would make sure by the time the colonel got to me that someone had been there to help me get up and be ready for him to come in and look like I was busy. So we got through that process. It's finally time to go home, and I did go home. You imagine what a homecoming you think is going to be like after you go through such a horrible ordeal. You just assume it's going to be a certain way. When I get home, there's nothing different. It's like, hey, okay, you're here, let's eat dinner. That's kind of the way it went. I don't believe I was ever asked about the war. Well, I know I wasn't. I was never asked by any of them about the war. I was never asked about my injuries. I was never asked about anything. And because I wasn't asked, I did not discuss it. I assumed that it was better left unsaid. and that was what was left of my family. And we always, for whatever reason, there was a resentment in my family because of the lost Christmas that it broke my heart, and I could never recover that for them. I tried, but you can't give back something that you have no control over. But through the years, I tried, but they always had this deep resentment that it so destroyed everything so badly for the Marine Corps to come and tell them that right at Christmas time. And I can understand that. When I reasoned it out, I could imagine what that had to be like for my mother and my father. It wasn't until many years later I found out that my father actually was in bed sick for over a week. Couldn't go to work. So upset about me being hurt. He'd been in World War II, he'd been a medic, and he knew what it looked like, he knew what it was like. And so he reacted in his own way with it. But I found the same thing was true with pretty much every friend I had. Things had changed. Life had moved on. They'd made other friends. You were the odd man out. Besides that, they were a little afraid of you. There was a stigma that went with being a Vietnam veteran that you could not overcome no matter what you did. There had been incidents where some had done mass shootings, and of course, anything that happened seemed to get blamed on the Vietnam veterans. And as a result of that, the stigma stuck. And even to this day, that's pretty much synonymous with not good things, Our group eventually was the ones that helped them realize that post-traumatic stress disorder was a real situation. Unfortunately, it was misdiagnosed in a way because it was determined that by some great mind that this must be a psychiatric condition. Well, any reasonable mind would have to know that if you experience a traumatic situation, there's a normal reaction to that trauma. And that normal reaction is exactly what happened to us. But yet we were branded as being someone with some type of a mental illness. Our trauma was different than some of the other traumas later on that they just treated as a trauma. They still had post-traumatic stress disorder, but theirs was different. So unfortunately, that stigma stayed with us. It's still with us. It'll be with us till long after we're gone. And unfortunately, that stigma is beginning to follow the men and women who serve today and come home as well, which is one reason why we have such a high suicide rate among our military men and women. There's a lot lost in serving this country, and the price comes very high. But anyway, I did get home, absolutely flat broke. The Marine Corps owed me some back pay, which I was trying to get from them. I was living at home with my parents at the time when I came home. My father was still dressing the wounds on my arm. They had never healed. They were still bandaged. I guess I was fortunate to have someone that actually knew how to do that. His concern was, if it got infected, I would lose the arm. So he worked very diligently to try to take care of that, even though I was rather irresponsible with my nightlife and things that I made it very difficult for him to do, I guess, let's put it that way. Anyway, as life went on, and I tried to find some way to live with the pain. I fell back into a pattern I guess I had prior to the Marine Corps, where I would be in the bars and I would drink. And I found that if I drank enough alcohol, I could dull the pain. But I also found that it would only dull it for so long, and then no matter how much alcohol you drank, you were stuck in that moment. You couldn't do anything with the pain, and you've had too much alcohol. So it was just a bad situation. But unfortunately, it was the only pain control that was available to me. There was no way to go just get pain medication. It just wasn't available. So I fell back into a bad pattern, and began to drink too much. But as I indicated, friends, even very, very close friends, things were different. You couldn't just hang out with them. They weren't the same people anymore. Their lives had changed. They had new girlfriends. They had new this. They had a new car. They moved on with life, a new job, and here you are, you're just there. That's all. You're just there, and you're pretty much alone, completely alone. And that's kind of the way it would go. So the drinking became worse, and eventually it would get to the point where I was arrested for DUI. My dislike of authority carried over into police departments and police officers and anyone with any authority over me. And pretty much I set up the scenario myself, and almost forced them to pull me over. They didn't want to. It was a local police force. But I really didn't give them any choice. And when they did come to the car, I came out swinging, and anyway, I ended up being arrested for DUI and put in jail overnight. And I had to call my father next day because I didn't have a dime. What I had, I'd spent on the beer I drank the night before, and I borrowed that. And the Marine Corps never did give me my money. Oddly enough, when they finally sent me a statement on it, I'll get back to the DUI in a second. When I finally got a notice from the Marine Corps, I guess that was what kind of tipped the scale for me into this downward spiral. Was I waited and waited for that money because I really needed it. I get a statement from the Marine Corps, and they said, you have been docked X amount of dollars for your uniform you had on. You didn't return your rifle, so you've been docked X amount of dollars for the rifle, for the helmets, for the boots, for some of the ammo. And when you got to the bottom of the page, it said, attached you will find a check for $1.42. That is what you have remaining once you have paid what you owe. And that kind of was the last straw. It really was crushing to know that they would have the audacity to expect you to pay for the stuff that was blown completely off your body. But they had that audacity, and they took the money. So that started the spiral that led basically to the drinking too much. when I was arrested for DUI, I knew the police officers. Both of them were the biggest drunks in town. But it didn't matter. I was the one behind the bars. And the next morning, I knew I was going to have to call my father because he's the only one I knew who had $250 in bail money to get me out. And I would have rather had someone take a horsewhip to me than to call my old man and tell him I was in jail and I needed money. But I finally had to do it, and I did. And I hear the door open when he comes in because he had a characteristic habit of whistling all the time and jingling the change in his pocket with his fingers. And so I hear him come in the front door, and I hear him addressing the officers out front. He's here to post my bail. So I'm standing there at the bars when my father comes to the door, very stone-faced, look on his face, still whistling. And he walks up and he said, "Son, what kind of bird can't fly?" And I'm dumbfounded. And I said, "What?" And he said, "What kind of bird can't fly?" I said, "Dad, I don't know. I just want out of here." And he says, "A jailbird, son. A jailbird can't fly." And he smiled. And he says, "You will pay back every dime." And I said, "Yes, Dad, I will pay back every dime." And he said, "Let's go home." Of course, I would find out some years later that his history wasn't much different than my own when he came home. So he showed me that mercy, and I appreciated it. He paid for my car to get it released. And I reached in my pocket and I had one dime. That's all I had. I had some gas in my car yet, but I only had one dime left. Well, a few weeks earlier, I'd met a young lady at a street fair. And she was a striking young woman, unusual, a little off the wall, but memorable, of course. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna use this time, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna call her. So I drove to Shelby, and I used that dime. And I called what would be your grandmother. And she was so excited to hear from me, and I picked her up. We rode around for hours and hours talking. That eventually led to a relationship that lasted 40 years. I wish it could have went 100, but it wasn't to be. But at any rate, that was the beginning of civilian life and the adult life from that point on. Eventually, the VA got involved, and I was able to jump through all the hoops that they required, which was almost as ridiculous as the military. And I had an opportunity to go to college. I didn't really want to go to college. I didn't really like school. but I was out of options. I couldn't use my right hand, which was my dominant right hand. I couldn't write. I was trying to learn how to write left-handed, but it wasn't very good. I was trying to learn how to do a lot of things left-handed that I wasn't doing real well. But that was my options. I was going to have to go to college whether I liked it or I didn't. And so I enrolled in college at Ashland University. And because I had flunked out of Ohio State in 1966, because I was partying a little too much and let my grade drop below a C, I was accepted at Ashland on probation, which really put a tremendous amount of pressure on me because they were only going to give me one semester to make the grade, or my college career was going to be over. Well, I found it extremely difficult to go on a campus during the 1960s when all the protesting was going on. We actually were on our honeymoon when the Kent State shootings took place, but the sentiment on the universities was still the same: anti-war, anti-warrior. So it was not a very inviting place to go. I got lucky enough that I was in a small enough program which just happened to be filled with very beautiful women, which for whatever reason seemed to appeal to me after that. They were very friendly and very helpful, and they kind of looked out for me to try to help me make things work out. And over time, I was able to, I tried tape recording the lectures, the boring lectures that I was listening to, and found out, well, that's a stupid thing to do because now I've got to hear it twice and I've got to write it down anyway. So I finally decided to learn to try to write better. And over time, it got at least legible enough that I could read it. That's so I could write some shorthanded ways to get the notes down, and was able to kind of hang in there. I had pretty much a photographic memory, so I was able to pretty much remember anything that I could see. And so I would memorize my notes, I would memorize the readings, and just feed them back when I would get an exam. And it began to work. And suddenly I realized if you could memorize, you could do anything in college, be anything you wanted to be, because that's pretty much all they were doing. And I was getting by. I was in a couple of debate classes where, unfortunately, the subject matter turned out to be the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, which was when Lieutenant Calley had ordered his unit to kill all of the villagers and burn the village. And so I was in a debate on that, and unfortunately had to take that side of it. But by that time I had enough experience, I guess, both in college life and in military life to be able to do that in a more adult manner, a little more sophisticated manner, and the debate went well, the class went well, and things moved on. Ultimately, with Linda's help, typing papers for me, encouraging me, I would go on to graduate with honors. From there, because of the degree I had an opportunity to still get a graduate degree, and the VA paid for it. So I had applied to 3 or 4 different universities, and I was admitted to all of them. the choice was trying to find something, because I'd come to love water and boating, was to be close enough to the boat to still be able to go fishing and go to school too. So that narrowed it down pretty much to Case Western University in Cleveland. And that's where I did my graduate work. During my undergraduate studies, in fact, shortly after I'd started college, I think it was, my brother became very seriously ill and was in a coma in Ohio State University Hospital in Columbus. And the family really pulled together to spend a lot of time trying to get through that as a family and to try to get him through that. And so we were there at the hospital a great deal. I only had one professor who basically graded me down because of my time away from the classroom. And that one grade was enough to keep me from having a 4-point through my undergraduate studies. My brother did eventually make it home, and my father and I, while we were sitting in his room one day, got to talking, and we're sitting there and we're thinking, well, okay, well, what are we going to do when he gets home? What can we do that he could be a part of, and something we could do together? But my father and I were not close. We really had a strained relationship for reasons I never understood. It was that way from the time I was young. He was always my hero, but I just couldn't make that connection with him. But as we sat there in that hospital, we decided we're going to build a boat. And we started sketching it out. And one thing led to another, and we said, okay, we can do this, we can do that. So we had drawn out our plans for what we we're going to do and how we we're going to do it. And over time, eventually, he comes out of a coma, and he improves enough, he gets to come home. And so we decide it's time to build this boat. Well, we didn't really have the internet to do much studies on basically how you would, kind of materials you would use, that sort of thing. So we just used good old common sense redneck learning. Build it big enough that it's going to float, you know. So we bought very heavy materials, but waterproofed, and we built a very large houseboat that we were going to be able to put in a lake and take my brother out fishing on. We did not realize when we built this, we actually used barrels for the pontoons. We also didn't have a lot of money to do this with, so we were resourcing whatever we could resource. The barrels were available, so we used the barrels for pontoons, and we put them together. Unfortunately, they were about 2 inches too narrow for a regular trailer that you would use for a pontoon boat to pick it up and take it to the water. So now we've built a houseboat, and we have to figure out how to get it to water. My old man was a genius. He says, let's use the jacks off of the camper. He had an old truck camper out back, and he said, let's just take the jacks off of that. We'll jack it up. We'll put the boat on a hay wagon, and we'll take it that way. It made sense to me, so we did exactly that. We put it on a hay wagon, and we pulled it down to Mifflin, which was a lake not too far from home. And of course, we happened to pick a busy day when all of the boaters were around. And of course, you got this marina full of beautiful boats and beautiful houseboats and pontoons and so on, and experienced skippers and experienced boaters. We show up with our pretty green houseboat, man-made, windows in the side. I mean, you know, for us, we thought it was pretty cool. To them, they thought it was kind of funny. What they really thought was funny was coming in on a hay wagon. And we back it down the ramp. And we're kind of proud of this thing by now. You know, we're getting kind of cocky now. We got it there. We're getting ready to put it in the water. We'll show you. We'll see. We back it in the water, and it never occurred to us that the trailer would float. So not only did the boat float, but the trailer floated under it, which meant we couldn't drive the boat because we couldn't get it off the trailer. So I looked at my father and I said, now what? He said, I'm not taking this home. He said, we're putting that thing in the water. I said, all right. So he pulls it up and he said, let's let the air out of the tires. I said, works for me. So we let most of the air out of the tires. We backed it in, and it didn't float as much, but it still floated enough that we couldn't drive it off. So we're up there and we're pushing on the front, and one of us trying to drive it off the back, and these people are just absolutely rolling down the hill laughing at us. And so that just incensed my father enough that he wanted to push the issue a little farther. I'm not taking it home sure now, you know. We are getting this boat in the water. And we pulled it back out. There was a bunch of cement blocks sitting there. He said, let's sink the trailer. Sounded like a better plan, so we threw those blocks on there. And needless to say, we drove that boat off that trailer, and we took it to the dock we had, and we used that boat all summer, and we had a ball. And we took my brother out on it, and he was a little afraid to be on the water, but it was a big enough boat, he had plenty of room, and it just became a family thing that we did that summer. But that connectedness made a difference in the relationship between me and my father that carried over for the rest of his life and mine. And we ended up buying another boat. Ended up with a boat on 2 different lakes. The one boat just kind of followed us home one day, which didn't sit too well with the wives, but in time they adjusted to the fact that we had 2 boats, and we would figure out what to do with one, but we're going to keep the other, and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, that basically built a relationship between my father and I that we spent many, many hours on the water together. And I found a place of peace that I hadn't found. And the water became my sanctuary. And it's stayed with me all this time. It's been something that I've loved and enjoyed, and it just was a place that was okay for me. Unfortunately, my wife was not susceptible to much of the sun. She was a redhead, fair-skinned, and burned easily. And even though it was fun somewhat, it wasn't fun enough to go out there for 10 or 12 hours a day like my father and I did. We, unfortunately, I think, over the course of a couple of summers, even, I know my son, Jeff, he went with us some. I think we just wore everybody out to where nobody wanted to go with us because we wasn't coming home until we caught enough fish. So in that regard, I think we kind of ruined it for everybody else. But it's still, even today, though I've had to sell my boats due to balance issues, water is still my sanctuary. And one way or another, I will figure out how to get back and be able to do it again. I'm just determined to make that happen. But as life went on, we had moved to Ashland, Linda and I had, and we're in school. She's pregnant, and we're excited about our first boy, our first baby. We didn't know what he was in those days. But Jeff was born in 1971. I laugh because for some reason I always would mix the two dates up. We were married in May of 1970, and he was born in May 26th of 1971. But when I would tell the story, it always came out wrong. And so I'm trying to correct it here now for good. It's on tape. But anyway, Jeff was born. I was absolutely elated. I had a son. The doctors were wrong. God had changed things to what he wanted it to be. And there was nothing more cherished to me then or now than my wife and my children. 5 years later, we would have a daughter. We had Alicia. 4.5 years after that, we had another son, Brad. It seemed logical at the time when we were young that let's spread these kids out and they'll always keep us young. In reality, that doesn't work. You are totally exhausted by the time you get through the first one, so the second one really beats you down, and the third one just absolutely exhausts you completely. So our logic didn't work out real well, but we still had a wonderful time raising our kids and spending time with our kids and having a life and a family life together. Unfortunately, I was never able to shake off all of the effects of war. Was never able to be far from the pain. As I said earlier, there really hasn't been a day since 1968 that I have not been in pain. And as much as I could mask that and pretend that I wasn't hurting, I always was. And at times that pain and that fatigue that was caused from being disabled, always trying to adapt to one hand to do things, would eventually end up with emotions erupting out of me where I said things I should never say, hurt people that I would never have wanted to hurt. But at any rate, life went on and the kids grew. And I'm now a proud grandfather of some amazing grandkids. Amazing and ingenious children of my own. We are estranged, part of us are in my family, which is a situation I will regret till the day I die. But in that process, unfortunately, at 40 years of marriage, Linda and I divorced. And I could say without any hesitation that what Vietnam did to me was nothing compared to what that did. I was absolutely crushed. And I didn't think I could possibly survive it. but with prayer and God and digging that old Marine out of the box that was laying on the ground and decided he wasn't going to lay there and die, I was able to come back and put things together again, at least for me. There's never been a minute I don't miss that particular family life. I couldn't have imagined at the time that it would ever not be that way. So it's been, even now, still, it's a terrible transition to try to deal with. But I was fortunate enough that God gave me another person in life to share my life with. An amazing, amazing one. And she was filled with life and effervescence, and was able to help me get through that time. And by July 11th, 2020, we were married. My son officiated at his home, and it was a beautiful wedding. And we've had a wonderful, wonderful time together. My health has began to fail much more in the last few years. And fortunately, she's a nurse by training. She's been a wonderful caregiver. And she's shown no regrets. I'm really pleased with where I'm at in life, I think, right now. At least as pleased as I can be with where I'm at in life. I will, however, if I can do it, I will have another boat that I can get on and go out on the water on, and that's my goal. So I probably somewhere along the line, I'll either get a boat and fall over, or get a boat and not fall over, but I will get a boat. So I'd have to say, I don't know where you end a story like this for life, but it's been an amazing journey. I will say that God has so richly blessed my life. I mean, I have been places that few people have had to go. I've come back from hell. I've come back from almost complete disability. And what people didn't know all those years, even after I finished college and went back to work, my family, other than my wife, didn't know. I was always 90% disabled, even all those years I was working. I just made it work. And I tried to make it look easy. It really wasn't, but I tried to make it look like it was. But I do thank God for the life I've had. And as I always tell one brother-in-law who happens to be one of my closest friends and my fishing nemesis, my life would have killed the lesser man. I am really pleased that you asked. That my grandson would care enough to ask was very special to me. But all through the years, that's the one thing that was surprising, is that no one ever did. No one seemed to ever want to know. We just, we did life the best we could do it. And we made the story the best we could make it. And I'm just happy to be here. And I'm very proud of my grandson. He's going to be an amazing, amazing man.